latter decision. So I want to thank you for your patience. This is the Senate Committee on Food and Agriculture. Today's topic is evaluating the need for the California Department of Food and Agriculture's light brown apple moth eradication program, and it's a review of the LBAM Environmental Impact Report. And I would like to thank all of you for coming today. I know some folks traveled some significant distance to be here. I'd also like to thank the department as well for being here. We have some questions on the sufficiency of the environmental impact report that we brought up at our previous hearing on this topic. And as I remember it, now that we have a final EIR, we're here to find out a little more about the findings, about the report, and CDFA's future plans for their LBAM program. Overall, the goal today is to evaluate the need for CDFA's light brown apple moth eradication program in its entirety. And obviously, the committee today has jurisdiction over CDFA, and we have, of course, been awaiting the final EIR product, and we will have some related policy questions on that product. I can tell you that it seems to me that this committee would not lean towards any sort of program would cause human harm or environmental damage. This is the new Food and Ag Committee. We're very concerned about these issues. And I do want to make sure that we have the department on the record to explain and to talk to us about the evaluating factors that were considered in this particular EIR. It's a goal, obviously, for this committee to be as open and transparent as possible, and we believe that should hold true for the EIR process itself. Obviously, we're going to hear from farmers and constituents who were affected by some of these decisions by CDFA. We'd like to learn more about the impact of these decisions based on the EIR, not only to business operations, but to the economy as a whole. Clearly, I can tell you that we will continue to monitor CDFA's activities as they relate to the LBAM program. We will not, of course, hesitate to have future hearings on this issue in order to get final actions regarding the EIR, so this won't be the last hearing that we have on this, I'm sure. And, of course, we're interested in public comment today, so anyone would like to make public comment for the record, we'd be very interested in making sure we have that as well. So that being said, we have a revised agenda. I hope everyone got that. We have 4 panels today, and we're going to start with James Carey, who's professor at the University of California, Davis, and Aaron Morin, who is an avocado grower. So if both of you can come up, and we can begin the process. And Sergeant, we'll need the microphones pulled to the table, actually, for this. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting us. Aaron actually is going to start.
Sure, that's fine. And just state your name for the record. As I said, we're building a public record.
My name is Erin Morin. I'm with the G3 LLC. We're avocado farmers. I've been in the family business since 1968. Just to let you know that I have a few things regarding the MedFly. We're currently under quarantine right now, and we're finishing up. It's been about 4 to 5 months since we've been under quarantine. And when CDFA notified us that we had to come to the meeting, they basically sat us at the Palo Mesa Resort hotel in the lobby or the area. And they basically had a guy there, I forget his name, but he was for the San Diego County regional area, and in their offices are in San Marcos. And he basically all the farmers came in and they weren't really pleased about this. And so he just stood up and said, well, this problem happens to be on your end of the woods, and said that you're going to have to buy the Melaphion for regular people, and the Spinoza for the organic growers. And unfortunately, the costs that I have here, with the treatment of the malathion for 5 applications equals $60 an acre, 6 applications equals $72 an acre, 7 applications equals $84 an acre. So what they told us, it would be about $800 a gallon. They also told us that we're going to have to set up an appointment with one of the inspections, and the inspector comes out and he will watch the farmer or the person who's licensed for the pesticides stir it up. But if you pre-stir it before they hit your property, you're going to have to dump it. And you're going to have to dump it, and then it goes into the water, which goes into reservoirs and all other sorts of things. We don't even know where it goes. And also they told us, this is all on you. You got to afford it. And we were basically just railroaded. I felt we were railroaded. I didn't feel that we had a fair shake in this. I was 500 meters away from the hot zone. The hot zone is where they detect the fly. I have maps. I have things with me that I brought. I will tell you that it was just heartbreaking to see a person from the government to treat us like that. We're farmer growers. We're people to supply food for our local areas and from our county. We want to stay in business. We don't want to be railroaded. Also, they gave us an option on buying insurance, quarantine insurance. So what my coworker did, she called our rural community insurance agency and talked about the quarantine insurance. And unfortunately, the insurance that I have was quoted in 2007. At 50% at CAT, the level is 50%. It's avocado. It's irrigated. The acres is 270 acres. The price per acre is $1,832, and the base premium is $43,939. If we went up to 60% at 270 acres, the base premium for that is $147,273. And that is just buying the buyout program, The buyout program is basically one step to getting to the quarantine insurance. And you can't qualify if you're not detected with that fly. And if you're not detected with the fly, you're out. You're sorry, sucker. And I already pay for my insurance, just for crop insurance itself, is $300 a year. And we get, in case natural disaster happens, like a fire or flooding or other things that happen, we have to go through that. And the U.S. government also gives us a refund. Got my bill here. I don't have it. Oh, great. Oh, there it is. The U.S. government gives us the base premium of $39,000. Oh wait, yeah, this is from the United States government, of $39,474, and that's what they're going to reimburse you if you had damages to just fire or threat damage, or just minor like major catastrophe, but nothing like on this magnitude where we're getting quarantine. It's just, I feel that this is really hard for us to figure out where we go or how can we afford this when we've got water issues. We have to supply for fertilizer and feed and just all of that. It's just a catastrophe for us. My growth manager has been in the organic business for 34 years, and he says that if we continue on this path, I'm going to be out of business in less than 3 or 4 years. And he just feels for him, and he's even spoken to growers that just are shaking their head and wondering what happened. Why are they coming down so hard on us? And so, yeah.
Has issues dealing with the medfly. My testimony is framed around this pest. However, I believe that virtually all the concerns I raised on the medfly can also be raised on other pests, including elbam. Now, I would venture to say that the farmer we just heard, Erin Morin, is the only person in this room who faces not just economic hardship from the medfly and elbam. She didn't mention, by the way, that she might be subject to elbam quarantine as well. But the real possibility of economic devastation, that is losing her entire farm and thus her means of livelihood. Last week, I, when I was heard that she was going to testify at this hearing, I got contact information since I was interested in what she would say about the medfly, and talking to her on the phone. On the phone, I learned that she was flying here on her own money, that no one was meeting her at the airport, and she was going to stay with somebody she met on Facebook. She stayed last night with my wife and myself, and I learned the magnitude of this devastation she and her family faces. What she laid out was really beyond belief. It's like a bolt out of the blue. 2 medflies are captured near her avocado farm, and her life is turned upside down. There's no economic options, no legal appeals. This is absolute tragedy for the farmers, and there appears to be no one who is concerned with their plight. Indeed, there appears to be either disconnect between the claims by CDFA on the impact of the growers and the reality to the problems on farmers. Just this morning, when I was preparing for this testimony, I went to the web, and the CDFA has posted the medfly interior quarantine. They state no business has gone out of business due to medfly quarantine. That's not a very high bar, but I'd like to know what the data is for that, and also it would be interesting to know how many people like Erin had to take out new loans, the degree of economic hardship, and so forth. Other statements: many businesses have benefited from sales of safeguarded material. Regarding vendors, these businesses may experience a reduction in sales and reduced shelf life, but neither of these reductions would represent a significant economic impact. I have to believe that there's a real disconnect here, and that the farmers and vendors and so forth are really suffering. So I would say, at the very least, from this hearing, that CDFA and USDA would be encouraged to talk to the farmers and get this directly. Now, regarding this exotic pests more generally, I have problem with many of the policies and programs for the invasive pests, because I believe that they're as outdated as they are as scientific. You can even take, for example, the 2 medfly trigger that caused Erin's farm to be quarantined. I served on the medfly panel from 87 to 94, and I know that there's no scientific basis for these. This is just sort of a consensus. You've got to have these policies. That would be an example. Another would be the acreage under quarantine and so forth. This is just an assertion. It's just a sort of consensus among panelists, but there's not a scientific basis for this. That would be just one example. Now, with respect to the medfly situation, but I also think is generic to many other pests, I believe that the medfly is permanently established in the state. There's probably many other fruit flies as well. There's 5 cities just where Erin is in San Diego County: Escondido, Fallbrook, Oceanside, Spring Valley, and Imperial Beach. They've caught medflies over a series of years there. 1 out out of 3 cities in the state. That is 167 different cities have had MedFly appearances. There's 47 of these cities with multiple appearances. In fact, one with 11 different years in which they've caught the MedFly, 2 cities in 5 to 6 different years. The MedFly was discovered just down the road here in Dixon in 2007, raising the disturbing possibility that spread to the agricultural regions of the state. There's been 60 emergency MedFly projects and thus 60 eradication declarations, that is successful declarations in the last, including 17 in the last 10 years. There's 300 square miles under quarantine, including Aaron's farm. Now, what I'd like to do is ask that CDFA and USDA answer in writing through you, Senator Flores, a series of questions. I won't go through all those, but if the claim is that these MedFlies are being reintroduced into the state, but in fact this does not resonate when you answer these questions. Why, for example, why did the MedFly never appear in the state before 1975, and since then has appeared in 2 out of 3 years, and more recently virtually every year? Another example, why are there no MedFly outbreaks in other high-risk but MedFly-friendly states, such as Texas, Arizona, New Mexico? They too have international airports, vacationers from Hawaii, and migrant workers. There's a series of questions like this. It simply does not make sense that you'd only find these in California. This 100% of all MedFly outbreaks are in California. This is worldwide, not just in the country. Now, I believe what to be done more generally about the exotic pest, I believe that we need a complete overhaul of the exotic pest paradigm. It simply cannot be changed by fine-tuning or tweaking. I believe we need something like a congressional hearing, including with the Secretary of Agriculture. I also believe that we need involvement of the National Academy of Sciences. You bring the best possible science to bear on this, and the most elite scientists become involved. For example, when we talk about paradigm shift, I think every sort of domain within this area needs to be revisited. From the farmer, I believe it needs to be in control. They need to be in control of their own destiny. You can have a consortium of farmers. It needs to be more in their hands than just in the state's hands, tapping into these emergency funds. The quarantine, we've got to work with farmers so that the local concerns are taken into consideration in concert with the more global concerns. Right now, Erin is just thrown under the bus, she was saying last night. Intervention, there's new tools. Where's the molecular biology here? There's just spectacular science available, and this is not being brought to bear on these exotic pests. Monitoring, you should be able to, what they call barcode a fly, within 24 or 48 hours and know where that fly came from. Not just in Hawaii, but in fact where in Hawaii or Guatemala and so forth. Exclusion, trade, all these things need revisited. I'll end here with a projection. I did a really rough regression here, and what's the trend here in terms of emergency projects is about 1 new emergency project every 2 years, but there's huge variation. And it's variation from 5 to 17 over the past 15 years or so. So in 10 years, that means we'd have 16 on average emergency projects on exotic pests with an upper limit of maybe 22. In 20 years, we have 21, upper limit of 30. 30 years, we have up to 35 or so. In other words, it's conceivable at some point in the not too distant future we may have 5 or 10 or even 20% of all farms in the state under some sort of quarantine, just like with Aaron's farm. Clearly, we cannot move forward with business as usual with exotic pests. It's not just a matter of doing this a little better. We've got to change the whole framework of how we approach this. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Let's go on to the next panel. Thank you very much. Okay, panel 2, we have Paul Gutierrez, Chris Middlestat, and Mark McAfee. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Any order? I'd like to get your
I don't mind going first, if that's okay. Sorry.
Thank you.
Chairman Flores, Vice Chair Maldonado, and esteemed members of the Senate Committee on Food and Agriculture, thank you for taking the time to hear testimony today about the light brown apple moth and the implications of the quarantine program. My name is Chris Middlestat, and I am the founder and CEO of the Fruit Guys. I founded the Fruit Guys in 1998 as a way to deliver fresh fruit to offices to replace junk food and help employees eat healthy while at work. We're a privately held family business that remains active not only in the business community, but also through service work that includes donations of food to those in need, farm stewardship projects around sustainability, volunteering for organizations such as the California Task Force on Youth and Workplace Wellness and Shape Up San Francisco. As a Bay Area-based business, we are advocates for locally grown produce and have followed that philosophy throughout our expansion by opening up local operations in places such as Philadelphia and Chicago so that we can buy from farmers in the region by season. Because we buy directly from many small and organic farmers in California, I have been given a view into the impacts of the light brown apple moth quarantine that I would like to share with you today. I draw two main conclusions from observing and talking with the small farmers that we work with. The first, as you will hear, is that it is truly the quarantine and not the moth that is most damaging to small California farmers. The second, as I will explain, is that the light brown apple moth quarantine is inadvertently creating international trade policy that benefits international farmers importing product from countries that do not quarantine for the light brown apple moth over our own local California growers who are having to exist under the terms of this quarantine. Blue Moon Organics, a small organic farm in Aptos, California, is a provider to the Fruit Guys of fresh organic strawberries. Greg Rawlings and his wife Amy are the owners, and we have worked with them for a number of years. Greg is one of the farmers we work with who has been quarantined. Greg sells nearly all he grows locally within 150 miles of Aptos. His first quarantine for light brown apple moth came in late June and early July of 2009. State officials found 20 suspected light brown apple moth larvae on 3.5 acres of his 7-acre strawberry patch. At the time, they told Greg that they would get back to him within 7 to 10 days. His product and that 3.5 acres of land was under quarantine for 3.5 weeks before officials got back to him with an answer that it was not the light brown apple moth, but a native leaf roller in his fields. Strawberries are, of course, fragile and need to go to market immediately, especially organically grown ones. Thus, during the first quarantine period, Greg not only lost his crop, but also had to pay pickers to remove the berries as they came in during this time so that they would not fester and ruin his future crops. The payment to workers plus the lost revenue was significant. However, this was not the end of his story. As the first quarantine ended, inspectors again came out and now inspected the other 3.5 acres of his strawberry patch. This was toward the end of July in 2009. In this section, they found 110 larvae, and again quarantined Greg and said that they would get back to him within 7 to 10 days. Greg asked them why they would assume that these larvae were any different from the others found just a few rows over, and thus why they would quarantine him when they had just proven that he had had a native non-LBAM leaf roller on his property. Greg did not get a sufficient answer. 25 days later, now into August and now past Greg's June and July prime strawberry growing season, CDFA reported to Greg that again all 110 larvae were in fact native leaf rollers and thus negative for LBAM. When Greg, exasperated, asked how he could avoid quarantine in the future, the answer he was given was that he needed to eradicate all caterpillars on his strawberries to be assured that he would not be quarantined. He was told otherwise, if they find anything, they will suspect LBAM and immediately quarantine. Greg asked, since they had found native leaf rollers previously, would this count to any documentation of not having found LBAM and thus alleviate quarantine threat? Again, they said no. As a sustainable and organic farmer, the kind we like to work with, Greg finds value in caterpillars as they provide food for spiders, which are a benefit to Greg and his growing practices. In total, in the summer of 2009, Greg lost nearly $40,000 in revenue and had to pay his workers to pick crop that was thrown away. He is still trying to recover from a year that includes this unexpected economic damage suffered from a quarantine that wasted his time and money, as well as the taxpayers' dollars, for a moth that, according to Greg and other farmers we work with, as well as scientists both here and abroad, this is not a threat to a farmer's crop whatsoever. Greg's story is not unique, but it is a good example of how we are hurting our local growers. I would now like to address how this policy not just hurts these local farmers, but also potentially benefits foreign farmers and creates a damaging and unfair trade imbalance. As an example, I would like you to think about 2 apple orchards, exactly the same. Both of them with light brown apple moth in them, in equal amounts. One farmer was given a pass from the light brown apple moth quarantine and allowed to sell apples to the grocery store. Another was restricted from sale due to the quarantine. This would seem like a clear case of a policy applied arbitrarily and subjectively that benefited one farmer over another without any legal basis for doing so. What could possibly be the difference between these two farms? In this case, an example that I'm giving you, one is in New Zealand and the other is in California. This is exactly what is happening in our relationship with New Zealand farmers who are importing fruit into California. In New Zealand, light brown apple moth is prevalent and farmers are not quarantined. Product can come into this country and state and be sold in our grocery stores. However, our domestic growers, our local growers, our organic growers who have the most dedication and appreciation for keeping California land healthy and productive are being restricted from selling their product and earning a living by those entities that are supposed to look after their interests of California farmers. I would imagine as a goal, CDFA would at least want to make sure that there is a level playing field for all, which currently, as a result of this policy in regards to domestic and international trade status, there is not. I know that this is a complex and contentious issue, and I appreciate your openness to hearing my arguments against the quarantine and why it is bad from a business perspective for California and for our farmers. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the invitation to speak this afternoon. My name is Andrew Paul Gutierrez. I'm a professor at UC Berkeley. I'm now emeritus, and my area of expertise is what I call agroecosystems analysis. It's applying engineering sorts of approaches to the analysis of pests and plant growth problems. I was the founder of the University of California IPM program back in 1976. I've been working on LBAM when I realized that they were trying to spend $100 million to eradicate it. So I started doing an analysis of it. And the analysis puts together the biology of the species, drives it with weather, you embed the model into a GIS program, and then you can map the potential distribution and abundance of that species. And the results that came out were absolutely astonishing. It said that this species would be limited primarily to the coast, that there would be some intrusion into the shadow of the winds coming in from San Francisco Bay in toward Sacramento Valley. And when you look on the ground, light brown apple moth is a very difficult species to find. It's not very common. And if it is such an important pest, why is it so difficult to find? Well, I tried giving this information to California Department of Food and Agriculture, sent a letter to Secretary Kawamura, addressed a conference in Foster City on LBAM, and by and large, the information was ignored. What CDFA's approach has been is to accept a USDA analysis which posits that most of California would be infested by light brown apple moth, and that southern half of the United States. To be polite, this analysis is at best bogus. It is not very good at all. CDFA claims that the hallmark of their eradication success is pink bollworm. When you do exactly the same analysis for pink bollworm, it says that mostly pink bollworm couldn't exist in the Central Valley of California. So what have they eradicated? They have eliminated a pest, supposedly, because they can't find it. But if you think about it, what's happened is that the introduction of BT cotton, which is highly effective against pink bollworm in the desert valleys, reduces the populations to very low numbers. So these anticyclonic winds that would normally bring the pest over the Tehachapi's during late summer brings very, very few to non-detectable levels. I've done a similar analysis on medfly, and the predictions for medfly are basically that it's Southern California, San Diego, Orange County, Los Angeles Basin, and a bit of Santa Barbara. On an annual basis, you might get patches of favorability elsewhere, but for something to be established, it must have continuous life cycles. Done the same thing for glassy wing sharpshooter and Pierce's disease. And I'm now doing the great berry moth, which has been reported from Napa County. All of this work was done without any funding from within the state of California. It comes mostly by working with European colleagues. Why? Because it's difficult to get funding from CDFA unless you're doing things that would tend to enhance how the bureaucracy is operating. CDFA has basically refused to listen to science, or at least have a discussion, an argument about the soundness of the science. And that does not bode well for the future when, as Jim Carrey said, we're going to have an abundance of new invasive species coming in. So my recommendation would be the following. The biology of species are not idiosyncratic. If you understand the biology and you can describe it in a simulation model, a mathematical model, and you can drive it with weather, then you can start predicting the kind of performance that it's going to be having in a particular area, and you can start mapping where it can be most destructive. In the state of California, this does not exist. This was the original goal of UCIPM, to develop systems models for all the major crops in California. It failed because as soon as the monies became permanent, it became a mini grants program, and we never got there. So my recommendation would be is that we start getting back to science and not the politics and not the bureaucracy that drives a funding request, say, within the state of California. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. McAfee.
Honorable Chairman and members of the board, thank you for having me here today and putting me on the board. I don't want to spend a lot of time saying the same things that were said in the last few minutes between James Carey and Aaron and Paul, Dr. Paul Gutierrez, as well as Chris, as I would say exactly the same thing vehemently and repeatedly, and I'm in total support of what they've said here in commentary. I want to bring up something that probably won't be spoken about today, and that is the general culture of the farmer in the complex. And you don't see a lot of farmers here today. And I would say that's the big reason I was asked to come speak, is because their voices aren't being heard. There is a culture of fear, and these farmers are petrified to show their faces and their voices in front of a forum which will be critical of them or measuring what they say. I participate at Organic Pastures Dairy. I'm the founder of Organic Pastures Dairy in Fresno, selling our organic products. I have almonds and various different things, raw dairy products, so on and so forth, throughout farmers markets in California. And we repeatedly hear from other farmers, pear growers, apple growers, strawberry growers, that these kinds of actions are done as, and they're not included in the process, and they're fearful to speak up in opposition to the process or in contribution to perhaps a better remedy in the process. And I would just repeat that I completely support what's been said before. However, I want to put additional tangent to this discussion, that is the fear factor of the farmers not being encouraged to be a full partner in the discussions because they're just scared to death. And the organic farmers are very fearful because of their certifications and their inability to go to a farmer's market, whether they be under quarantine or the required pesticides or inhibition or suppression measures that they're being asked to do. So I would just add the other tangent to this is that the fear from the farmer being scared to participate in the process. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank all of you. Let me just for this panel, you've used some words that I've kind of written down: the fear and politics, and the issue of whether or not the studies are actually valid. And is the bottom line from all of your perspective that this is something that we're never going to eradicate anyway? I'd like to hear just your opinion. Doctor, you could pull a microphone, please.
I don't think so, and I think Jim Carrey is on record as having said the same thing. Mm-hmm. It's probably been here for quite some time. Populations are low. They're being controlled mostly by natural enemies, mm-hmm. So they're just going to become part of the background. They feed on all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes?
I'd also add, too, that the farmers that we work with, I think, again, talking about the culture of farmers, that they would like to handle these things to some degree on their own and make decisions, especially the organic ones, about their organic farms autonomously about how they're going to handle their pest programs. And the ones we talk about, when we did a survey of 20 farmers in Northern California we work with to get this data about who's been affected by the apple moth, and they laughed when we said the apple moth, because they said, gosh, that's so far down on the totem pole of things that we worry about that's just not something that is even considered dangerous to our farm.
If I could just add one more thing. The world's an immune system, and it lives and breathes. And as we create opportunities and voids where we get rid of the biodiversity, we start inviting things to occupy our space that could be a problem, could be a pathogen for us. That goes for anything. Inside of a creamery environment, a pasture, your gut, in environments where we're worried about invasive exotic species. We have an immune system macroscopically, the whole entire world. We have them also in our backyard and in our children's guts. We are one huge immune system. We have to work with Mother Nature, or else we're going to be tangling with her forever. So it's very important to work with her.
Mm-hmm. The other thing is that you have to look at these species almost one by one. I mean, they have different potential. So, for example, the recently discovered European grape berry moth. When you look at the parameters of that one gives cause for concern. And that's something that monies could be better addressed in terms of how to deal with that. And yet I don't think that anybody, to my knowledge, is approaching that one yet.
And just an opinion on the trade policy you mentioned earlier in terms of Canada, Mexico, other countries, Europe. What could you tell me?
I'm sorry,
What can you tell me about those other countries and with their dealings with albaum?
I'm not quite sure. I've really looked at the New Zealand issue because New Zealand, I think, is so akin to California in terms of having the light apple moth, having it established for a long period of time. And again, the concern we have there that I don't think really has been addressed, at least in a sort of publicly in the media and just out in discussion, is that there is this sort of accidental consequence of this policy that is creating an international trade issue that needs to be discussed and talked about. And I think it's a very important one because when I think domestic California farmers realize it and understand that, it's going to cause challenges.
Okay, I want to thank the panel. And Mr. McAfee, you mentioned the cycle within the body. Can you just go a little further than that? And
It's one of my favorite subjects.
I know it is. So maybe we can get it on the record.
Well, Dean, I appreciate the invitation to discuss this briefly. Yeah. Probably the most dangerous thing we can do in America as a living, breathing organism is to walk around with a weakened immune system. We've created challenges in our CAFO dairy systems in pigs and chickens. If you've seen Food Inc., you know that we're creating superbugs with antibiotic abuse. And now they're killing tens of thousands of Americans every year because of the fact we've got superbugs, the MRSAs and the VRAs and all the other Klebsiellas and everything. And when you have a depressed immune system and the human organism, that's a welcome mat for this superbug to come get you. So we have to be thinking about how we manage our ecosystems externally in terms of not creating superbugs and monocultures, but rather polycultures and diversity that are strong, and yet at the same time building our inner ecosystems in our bodies so that we are not subject to them or any other pathogen out there as a welcome mat. So that's why we always talk about raw milk, because of the biodiversity, but it's also other whole foods that are unprocessed and whole that help us keep that strong inner immune system. That's why you see this whole food movement going on and people saying prevention, immune system, because it's not talked about. But that's just a little pitch that I thought I'd throw in. Thank you for asking.
Well, I just wanted to make sure, and if we wanted to get more information on this, we can go to your booth out on in the CDFA Ag Day.
Unfortunately, we're not there today. We were not allowed to present our booth. Hopefully, maybe next year we will. But I've been politically correct and shaking everybody's hands today, and hopefully we'll be invited. But I think it's important to have everybody at the table because some of the best markets we have are the niche markets, and they need to be addressed as well. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. McAfee. Appreciate it. Thank you for putting that latter part on the record as well.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Let's go ahead and have panel 3, the Deputy Director for the U.S. States Department of Agriculture, and I will state as you're coming up that you have not been cleared to provide testimony to the committee, but we participate your ability to answer some questions.
I certainly will give it a try, Chairman.
Yeah, just maybe some broader general big picture questions. Maybe just, I think I asked the last panel earlier about U.S., Canada, Mexico. They have LBAM populations in those countries?
Mexico and Canada do not. New Zealand or Australia, it's believed to originate in Australia. But both Australia and New Zealand do have established populations of black brown.
They do. And do they have they reached any different scientific conclusions than we have through our particular EIR and the
I have not read, to be honest with you, I have not read the EIR, so I can't really say one way or the other on that, but I could speak to the trade component
Please.
of that whole.
Yes.
The gentleman previously mentioned a legitimate point. I think, though, it's important to remember that in the case, the specific case that was mentioned, and that was the apples from New Zealand, in the case of the U.S., there is a mandatory IPM program specific to light brown apple moth that's required, and a very, very intensive inspection regime. If you take the other part of this component, Chairman, that I think is important to keep in mind is that the international arena is becoming smaller and smaller. And by that, what I mean is we export a lot of produce to Mexico and Canada, two biggest trading partners for California. For New Zealand to ship to those countries, the LBAM hosts either have to be treated or come from free areas. I can see a situation where, under different circumstances in California, I could see those two trading partners in particular requiring the same import conditions. Under discrimination within the IPPC, they have to create equivalent import conditions. So I could see that as a potential side effect.
And if we were to declassify our particular LBAM issue from a Class A threat to something minor, non-actionable pest, would that cause other countries to follow suit in your opinion?
Yeah, I've heard that. I guess my feeling is this. The trade arena internationally has become a lot more sophisticated, and I think that by and large, through training, sometimes by the U.S. themselves, other developed countries like Japan and Australia, the plant protection authorities of most of our trading partners become pretty sophisticated. And I think that by and large, anybody that thinks that if the U.S. was to deregulate, that necessarily some of the other trading partners would sort of fall in line, I don't see that. I see examples historically that have just happened recently that indicate that that would not be the case.
And in terms of the international trade issues associated that have been mentioned by some of our farmers in the last panel, are there state-to-state distinctions in the way that we do things, Florida, California, when it comes to LBAM?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, I mean, we have a state control issue through CDFA here on LBAM. Is there any difference in what we do in other states, let's say Florida, for example?
I want to make sure I understand the question. Is Florida, what would happen if we deregulated? What would happen in the case of interstate movement?
Right.
Well, I would think that, well, two things could happen. The states could petition us, the U.S. government, to impose restrictions. If none of that happened, then I could see a scenario where trading partners would consider not only California generally infested, but probably the United States generally infested. And so they would impose requirements likely for light brown apple moth hosts from those states.
And when we negotiate, is LBAM one of those items we negotiate about, or is it something that's a hard, fast issue with other countries? Is it something to negotiate with, or is it just kind of one of those things that's off the table?
No, it really, in fact, we've spent quite a bit of time on, I would say, rather substantive negotiations with, particularly with Canada and Mexico, a little bit with Chile and some of the other trading partners. There's roughly about 11 that have it listed as a quarantine pest, some of them fairly major. But certainly Canada and Mexico rise to the top, and we've had, I would say, rather substantive negotiations in trying to, the knee-jerk reaction sometimes by our trading partners to just prohibit, but we were able to at least keep product moving under specified conditions.
Thanks. All the questions I have. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thanks for the time.
You're welcome.
Okay, let's have panel 4 from CDFA, John Hewitt, and Dr. Robert Levitt. Thank you both for joining us. I don't know if you have statements. I have some questions. I don't know how you want to start. I guess, what I'm really more interested in, as I said at the beginning of the hearing, is maybe just getting a quick outline on the history of the EIR would be good to get on the record. And, kind of what triggered the EIR, and was it necessary to add value, and ultimately who wrote it, and, those types of big picture questions.
Certainly, Senator.
Thanks.
And good afternoon. John Hewitt, General Counsel with the Department of Food and Agriculture, and accompanying me is Dr. Robert Levitt, Acting Director of the Plant Health and Pest Prevention Division. I'd like to thank the Senator, the committee, and also the other guests for their continued interest in invasive species. I have quite a bit of information. I know you have quite a bit of questions, so I'll jump right to the timeliest information for the committee. After nearly 2 years of work, CDFA certified its light brown apple moth programmatic environmental impact report. The broad purposes and objectives of the environmental impact report are protecting California agriculture and the environment from damage by the light brown apple moth, and the use of tools to accomplish this in an environmentally safe and responsible manner. I'd also like to highlight a couple of minor program revisions and clarifications that are contained in the programmatic environmental impact report. In summary, the light brown apple moth program will focus its resources on control and suppression where possible, and it will eradicate small, outlying, and discrete infestations. Initially, this will occur through the deployment of twist ties, and supplemented or superseded in the near future by the sterile insect technology as soon as it is practical. And CDFA will not be making any aerial releases of insect pheromone as a management strategy for the light brown apple moth program.
Is the latter item, is that spraying that you mentioned?
The latter item,
three
Senator, the eradication tool.
Yeah.
For
you just mentioned.
Correct. I think that more commonly referred to as the aerial spraying.
Yeah.
Aerial application of pheromones has been removed as a management tool for the light brown apple moth program. That is correct, Senator.
Okay. And is that a firm, solid, not to go back to policy?
Correct. That is firm, solid.
Okay.
It is discussed in the findings that are accompanying the environmental impact report.
Okay.
Correct, Senator.
Okay. And is that to say that maybe we were too quick on the draw to start that process? The governor moving through, I believe, executive order to do that? If it wasn't good now, was it good then? I'm just trying to get an understanding of how we make these decisions.
Certainly, Senator.
Yeah.
I guess I'm having
We took it to EIR.
difficulty following you. I apologize.
Well, the EIR probably tells you we're not going to do any spraying, correct?
Actually, the environmental impact report evaluated the aerial application of pheromones as a management tool, as well as a number of other management tools. It was concluded through that process that it is not going to be the most efficacious tool for the current strategies that we wish to deploy.
Okay, but we did deploy it at the beginning of this process. Is that correct?
Correct. The Department of Food and Agriculture did utilize aerial application of pheromones in a couple of instances back in 2007. However, if I could clarify, Senator, the goals of the program were substantially different at that time, as well as our legislative mandate was different as well.
What were the goals of the program then as opposed to now?
The goal of the program at that point, in 2007, as Food and Ag Code Section 6050.1, recently repealed Food and Ag Code Section 6050.1 required us to eradicate the light brown apple moth. However, as is discussed in the environmental impact report, there have been a number of changes, including the development of sterile insect technology, as well as an exponential increase of the apple moth population, which have contributed to the decision not to use it as a management tool.
Got it. Is there a change not only in that section you've mentioned, but in philosophy at the department? Are we now saying that we are not going to eradicate under the EIR? Is this still full eradication, or is this some sort of management tool? Because you said
I'm
that
not
the beginning.
completely responsive, just jump right in, but I think I understand what you're getting at.
Yeah.
The goals and objectives of the program now are to control and suppress the light brown apple moth program, and in those outlying areas would be to eradicate those small and discrete populations of the apple moth.
Okay. And what percentage of the small and discrete populations are we trying to eradicate, and which percentage are we leaving alone or just managing? We had a pie, and the outer areas or little pieces we're trying to eradicate. What percentage of the program is kind of geared towards that?
I'm personally not sure about the percentages and numbers, but I'll defer to Dr.
Sure.
Levitt.
We can back forth.
And Dr. Levitt could talk a little bit about successes of eradication in those outlying areas where we've successfully taken those discrete populations and already eradicated them, and then also the plans going forward.
Let's do that. But I want to keep. I'll bounce back between you both. But have we? Big picture question: have we ever eradicated any pest in California? Absolutely 100%.
Yeah, if I may, Senator, the first question about the percentages. Most of the light brown apple moth are in what we call the generally infested area. Okay. And that would be in roughly Marin down to Santa Cruz, including the western sides of Alameda County and Contra Costa County. Mm-hmm. And in that area, we are adapting a contain and suppress strategy.
Okay.
We are planning on doing local eradication in the small localized outlier populations. And right now, those would include areas in which we have one or two moths more than 5 miles away from the generally infested area. In particular, we're looking at Davis, Tracy, Manteca, Los Osos, Arroyo Grande, a few places like that. And I believe we're doing delimitation right now in San Diego, and we're awaiting also results from Stockton and Woodland. So they're very small outlying the goal of that is to keep agricultural produce and products from the Central Valley moving to foreign and domestic markets.
Okay.
And we have eradicated previous small outlier infestations with the pheromone twist eyes, and in one case with BT, in Napa, Treasure Island, Sherman Oaks, San Jose. I think there was a couple other locations. So we do know that the pheromone twist eye technology works.
Okay. So what is the difference in the program 2007 to now, as you given that area, given what you call the outlier areas where we have eradication, given the Marin, Santa Cruz area, what we now call contain and suppress? What's the difference in this policy as opposed to what it has been in past years?
Are you specifically asking about the difference between an eradication program and a
I just want to know, you did an EIR. What did you learn from the EIR that's changed your approach and your opinion of this particular problem, this light brown apple moth issue? What's changed since the EIR that you didn't do or apply in years past?
Well, I'll speak broadly and then defer to Dr. Levitt, but the difference between eradication and control and suppression program isn't necessarily in the tools that are used, but in the frequency and the density in which they are used. That's the general difference between the control and an eradication program. Mm-hmm. Dr. Levitt?
Thank you, John. Yes, Senator, again, I want to stress that the goal of the light brown apple moth program is to keep California agricultural produce moving into foreign and domestic markets, and that's always been the overarching goal from the beginning.
Yeah.
Now, I also want to clarify that in the environmental impact report, several alternatives were evaluated as being available to the program. I'd like to stress that all of those alternatives were found to be adequately environmentally safe. That is the 5 alternatives that were in the final draft. What has happened, and I'd also like to stress that the aerial release alternative in the EIR was different than what was actually done in 2007. That said, yes, the program has changed direction, and that's based upon the survey and trapping data. On March 15th, the USDA made an announcement that based upon the extent of the infestation of light brown apple moth here in California, that in their judgment, eradication is no longer feasible. And the CDFA, of course, has the same data, and we concur with that conclusion.
Okay. Was that conclusion different than what you started with in 2007?
In 2007, the USDA convened a technical working group of world-class experts on the light brown apple moth, and given the trapping and infestation data at that time, the USDA and the CDFA believed that the infestation could be eradicated.
Okay. And what is the opinion now of CDFA? Has the population increased since that time, or has it actually gotten smaller? Have we eradicated, controlled, or what's the big picture in terms of the population?
The big picture, Senator, is that the population of the light brown apple moth has increased in the generally infested areas exponentially. The numbers are contained in the environmental impact report, but from the non-scientist perspective, I can tell you that in those heavily infested urban areas, the densities are growing rapidly.
And how do these populations move?
Senator, the populations can move 2 ways, essentially. One is through natural spread, and we believe that to be actually quite slow. The main way that the populations of any invasive species would spread, including the light brown apple moth, is through artificial human-assisted movement, and particularly on nursery stock, plants given to your grandmother, in some way being carried from one location to another by people.
So they're being moved by people like us, then?
Well, I mean, everybody doesn't go to the store or look in their backyard for invasive pests necessarily when they, give a plant to their daughter or something. So it does move inadvertently, yes.
Do these predators have any natural? Does the moth have any natural predators? And would we have enough of these natural predators to actually inhibit the spread, or is this something that we're not?
Yes, Senator. The CDFA actually started a program to track natural enemies, natural predators from the very beginning back in 2007. And we know that they are at least semi-effective in other countries, New Zealand and Australia. What our researchers say so far is that the number of natural predators here in California are few, and that the effect so far is minimal. But we do track that because it would be an important part of decreasing the population.
Okay. And just so I'm clear on what the department's position is at this point, and been bandering a little bit, eradication versus control, and you've given me some examples of Santa Cruz and Marin as a control and suppress area, and some of the smaller outlier areas as being eradication. So what's the goal? Is it both? Is it one? Is it the overall picture, control and suppress? What would you term?
As Dr. Levitt mentioned earlier, that the overarching goal is to allow agricultural products to continue to be able to move domestically as well as internationally, and to protect the existing environment. The light brown apple moth, I think somebody mentioned earlier, could feed on potentially more than 2,000 plants in California. Specifically to achieve that goal, as I mentioned in my opening comments, the department will focus its resources on control and suppression where possible, and in those erratic outlying areas, the goal would be to eradicate and keep the pests from moving.
Okay, and I guess keep bantering this, but you had a process that said eradicate at one point by 2015. Is that no longer the goal?
That is correct. The findings that accompanied the EIR at certification made a moderate revision to that, and that is focusing from eradication to control and suppression.
Okay, I've been trying to get you to say that sentence for the last 10 minutes. So, okay, so we're clear. So we've gone from an eradication program to a control and suppress program with goals no longer set at 2015 of total eradication, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And as I mentioned before, primary reasons for that was the exponential increase in the apple moth population, as well as the sunsetting of Food and Ag Code Section 6050.1, Senator.
Right. No, I get it. It just brings to mind, and it's for future reference, I guess, to CDFA. From my vantage point, I should say, that the rest of the committee isn't here, that we, in late 2007, just began to utilize an aerial treatment that was hell-bent on eradication, and it took us an EIR to recognize that control and suppression of a population is natural in its habitat, that is always going to be with us and has always been with us, was probably not the best course of action. That's what the EIR tells me.
Senator, I think my reading of the EIR would indicate that over the course of 2+ years of preparing that environmental impact report, the one thing we couldn't do was freeze the population numbers at their current levels. So it was a bit of a moving target, I guess you could say, in that instance. That as we continue.
But you just told me earlier that the population's gotten bigger, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the 2007 spring was kind of a worthless endeavor then, right?
Well, I disagree, Senator. We were looking to fulfill our statutory obligation, which was to eradicate the light brown apple moth at that time, based on the population numbers of 2007.
No, I get it. It just seems to me that it was, and the governor took that action via executive order. Is that correct? So when you say to meet the statutes or to meet the charge was to eradicate, I mean, I thought the governor went so far as to utilize an executive order in order to call this an emergency, so that his emergency powers would allow for swift action on this, or was that not the way it proceeded? Or
to be honest with you, Senator, I wasn't with the department at that time in 2007, but my understanding of the governor's emergency powers, and I don't want to purport to be an expert by any means on this, is that would have been the tool to achieve eradication, that actually Food and Ag Code Section 6050.1 specifically laid out eradication as the department's direction for the program at that time.
Okay. So the EIR was, from your perspective, then has changed the policy absolutely on its head in terms of your program today for LBAM.
Go ahead.
As opposed to where we started in 2000.
Yeah, Senator, I'm not sure that I would respectively disagree that the EIR itself changed the program. The EIR just provided alternatives to the program which were evaluated, and all were accepted in the EIR. There was originally 6, we went to 5. All 5 were accepted. It's the program itself that changed, and it was a policy decision at the Department of Food and Agriculture and at, I believe, at the USDA that was behind their decision that it's just no longer feasible because the populations of Alabama have gotten too
USDA
great.
came out and told us in January that eradication was no longer feasible. Correct.
March 15th, yeah.
By 2015. What was the general cost of the eradication effort? Do you know how much we spent on this? And
year to date, throughout the entire process, or
how about just the process so
far?
The
process in total, Dr. Levitt?
Yes, thank you, John. I can tell you what the state of California, what the CDFA has spent, and that is through January of this year, which is the latest numbers that I have from the beginning of the program. We spent approximately $39 million of federal funds and approximately $4.5 million of state funds.
Okay.
And the USDA spent, of course, more on their own behalf.
Okay. And let me ask, we're at the close of my legislative career here in the legislature and the governors as well. Depending on what side you're on, it could be a positive day for either. But I think the issue I have leaving this place is, how do we know the program won't change when we're gone? That we won't go back to spraying, that we won't go back to, how do we create how does the CAR get placed in some sort of, stone that people refer to it as I just said, will we ever spray again? And I think the answer was, what was the answer actually?
The answer with respects to the eradication or control and suppression,
yeah.
The department will not be using aerial application of pheromones to treat the light brown apple moth.
How do I need to put that in statute before I leave so that all of us leave here with some sort of sense that we made? I'm just wondering because, things change, or does that hamper the department from your perspective in terms of some sort of future view of the apple moth? The EIR gave us an indication of what should be done. USDA told us its opinion. But if we were to put a bill in and say this will end this for good, based on an EIR that I think people look to and say, okay, this says contain and suppress, would that be something that the administration or CDFA would support?
Senator, I can't speak on behalf of the administration with respects to prospective legislation.
Sure.
But if I may explain a little bit about the significance of the findings document as it relates
Sure.
to the environmental impact report, because I think the short answer is no. I don't think, the Senator, that you need to carry legislation forward, because the findings document with respects to the environmental impact report lays out, essentially clarifies and supersedes in some respects what's in the environmental impact report, and as a policy statement, the removal of the management tool of aerially treating the light brown apple moth with pheromones. That door has been shut. The opportunity, you said, if the department came back, next administration came back, they would have to undergo subsequent environmental review process to go ahead and open that door back up. So the public would be invited back in at that point, Senator, to have a discussion and a debate about whether or not that's the correct avenue to proceed down.
Okay, so basically you're telling me that every type of decision in this case should have an EIR prior to the choosing of, let's say, aerial spraying or something of that sort, eradication efforts.
I'm not sure I follow the question, Senator, but all projects that that the state or CDFA undertakes are subject to the California Environmental Quality Act.
Okay, but when the governor asked for spraying, did he have that in his briefcase and didn't show any of us? Because I'm not sure there was an EIR that allowed for that, just a statute. That's what I mean. Why would we have done this type of study prior to this aerial spraying period?
Well, the department made the decision to utilize the aerial application of pheromones as a management tool in 2007 to try and eradicate the light brown apple moth,
right,
because
but it was based on,
but
it wasn't based on an EIR, correct?
That is correct. We utilized two different tools under the California Environmental Quality Act to proceed with our activities.
What were the two tools?
We used an emergency exemption as well as a categorical exemption under the California Environmental Quality Act.
Yeah. That's how are those triggered? The governor calling for a state of emergency in this? I think so.
Yeah. The Department of Food and Ag would make an evaluation about whether or not, first of all, the general CEQA checklist would be, is the proposed activity a project by definition under CEQA?
Right.
If it is it the first threshold would be, is it categorically or some other ways exempt from the CEQA review process?
And most things that are exempt from the CEQA review process are emergencies, correct?
I don't know the percentages, Senator, of
What was, I guess,
objections.
why was this an emergency? I mean, today we find out now we're in a control, suppress environment with, Marin and Santa Cruz and suppression and control and small outlying areas with 5 moths under an eradication type of an issue. But that doesn't seem to sound alarm as an emergency, although it's important. Trade, and as you've been mentioned, that's the number one thing, is to move agriculture through the process. But I'm just trying to understand how we prevent. A lot of our role here, obviously, is to do oversight, and when we do oversight, we have to ask, and we should ask questions about, how can we learn from this particular 2007 to 2010 experiment, if you will. And you're telling me that under CEQA you're allowed two types of exemptions that would not force the department to do a full EIR. And I'm just wondering, how do we create a system that would have you look at an EIR, so would have made this decision in 2007 versus today?
Well, Senator, my general thoughts are that the CEQA process is extremely protective of the public's opportunity to provide input. In the case that with the sample,
it is, but the problem is that the governor didn't utilize that process when he did the spring in 2007. I mean, that's the entire gist of the problem, is that it didn't allow for this type of transparent discussion. It just spray and ask questions later, and then there was an outcry, and then spraying stopped, and there was a bigger outcry, and then there was an EIR, and now we find the department standing before us saying, oh, no, we're not going to eradicate, we're just going to control and suppress, which was the original call back in 2007. And the question is, how do we, and we're basing it on the feds who made a decision, USDA, and also our own ERR now. The question is just simply, how do we prevent those types of decisions from any administration? And Governor Schwarzenegger, Governor whoever. I mean, how do we allow for CDFA to make substantive decisions based on good science?
Well, the decision that the department made with respects to the aerial application of pheromones for the light brown apple moth was based on what we believed to be the environmental and economic risk to California at that time. And, as USDA has articulated in their most recent reports, that 33 states, 2,500 plant species, and in California alone, $200 to $500 million of crops are potentially at risk annually. So, I mean, those are some of the contributing factors that the department used in determining to proceed forward with the aerial application of pheromones as a management tool in 2007.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but I think, today we look back and you stand on an EIR that says we have other methods. Is it correct that say the department had to be sued in order to produce this EIR? I mean, it wasn't something you voluntarily did, right?
Well, I disagree, Senator, but go ahead.
I believe that we started the EIR process before the lawsuits, Senator.
Okay. How much before the lawsuits?
Several months, I believe.
Several months?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was talked about at the very beginning of the program, and it took a while to do the initial study and go through the steps that John Hewitt was just saying.
Okay. Let me just go through a few more questions, and I'm getting a clear picture of kind of what we want to do here from a legislative point of view. I'm just trying to see if I can get a few more questions answered. The controls that are currently in the EIR that you outlined at the beginning of your testimony then say that pesticides or aerial spraying itself will not be utilized in any conditions, under any conditions at this point?
That is correct, Senator. With respects to the light brown apple moth program, our findings set and provide the clarification from our final EIR that the department will not be utilizing aerial application of pheromones as a management tool for the light brown apple moth.
Okay, but then I guess I've read this as saying that at least in populations of areas of 100 persons or less, that aerial spraying is allowed. Is that correct?
That correct, Senator. That statement appears in the final environmental impact report, but that statement is clarified and superseded by what is in the findings, and that is the department's position that they will not use the aerial application of pheromones as a management tool for light brown apple moth treatment.
Okay. And in terms of the fall spraying, there were reports of respiratory symptoms. How did we deal with that data in this particular EIR? Was that the health effects of this taken into account?
Are you talking specifically about the environmental review process or about the complaints from citizens relative to the 2007
The 2007,
treatment?
and were that testimony then taken into account in terms of some of the findings of the actual EIR itself?
Dr. Levitt?
Thank you, John. Yes, in the actual EIR itself, it had the alternate formulations, not the ones used in 2007, and it had the maps of where we were applying. In the comments, however, in the responses to comments, which is the last part of the EIR, we did address the question you're asking about the 2007 aerial applications. And we referenced the studies done by the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment and the Department of Pesticide Regulation and the process they put in place to track future reports of this type. And we referenced their report that's been in the public arena now for, I think, 2 years, saying they found no direct connection between the sprays and the pesticide illnesses.
Okay. And this EIR has now been certified, is that correct? It's as of yesterday, today?
That is correct, Senator.
Okay. And so all of the methods as put forth in the EIR now is the official policy of CDFA, what you're following then, correct?
That is correct, Senator.
Okay. Let me just ask a few more questions. Do people have recourse under your current methods? In other words, do people still disagree with even your implementation of the EIR? Are there other means for people who feel aggrieved to deal with CDFA and
respective to the general operation of the program moving forward,
yeah,
or their remedies under CEQA, or what?
How about the moving forward?
Moving forward, the department's always open to and responsive to comments that the public may have with respects to the management of this program going forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Those are all the questions I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, for your interest in invasive species.
Well, thank you. We'll take public comment now, so if anybody, and you can feel free to come up again if you feel you heard something that you want to clarify. Thank you. All I ask is you state your name for the record.
Hi, this is Chris Middlestead again. I'd just like to follow.
Don't worry. We're not in a rush here.
Okay.
Trust me. This is a short hearing. You can ask Mr. McAfee. We normally have 6 or 9 hour hearings, so this is midnight hearings. So
got it.
This is fine to get it on the record. Let's get it all on the record. That's the point.
Okay. Chris Middlestead again from the Fruit Guys, and I just wanted to clarify a point that I had made in response to the Deputy Director from the USDA, a point that he had made about the light brown apple moth about product coming out of New Zealand from foreign countries that are coming into the United States. He said were inspected for things like light brown apple moth. And as a follow-up to that statement, I just wanted to clarify that the point that I was trying to make is if the goal of moving product into foreign and domestic markets is the goal of the CDFA, that we're looking for just equality and parity. And the difference between the two, and to note, is that in New Zealand, if something is grown in an orchard and there is 1 or 2 light brown apple moth, that crop is not stopped from being exported, as it is here in a domestic market where if there's 1 or 2 apple moth, that crop is stopped. So, okay. As the example that I gave earlier with Bloom Organics is stated.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, for holding this hearing this afternoon. Frank Ager, a former 7-term mayor of Fairfax in Marin County. I've served on local, state, and federal agencies boards and commissions for 46 years, including the California Coastal Commission and the Golden Gate National Recreation Area Board of Control. I currently serve on the Marin-Sonoma Mosquito Vector Control District and the Ross Valley Paramedic Authority. The CDFA has been crying wolf over LBAM for 3 years. There has been no damage, none, to crops in California. The only damage has been to farmers by the unlawful quarantines placed on them by making it difficult to move products to market and even prohibit the movement of some ag products. When the government bases its decision to quarantine a crop on an incorrect and faulty premise, and it is not based on sound science, then that quarantine is unlawful. In 2008, the CDFA was telling us LBAM will destroy 250 crops, including grapes, apples, and cherries. We were told that LBAM would destroy coast redwoods. They said that there was an emergency. They said they had the aerial spray and the pheromone checkmate was safe. They held organic farmers hostage in 2007. If they agreed to be sprayed with checkmate, they would not lose their organic status. That's what they were told. The CDFA said the inert ingredients were safe. As a result of Governor Schwarzenegger's releasing of the list of inert ingredients, the so-called secret ingredients, the public found out what the 11 inert ingredients were. One was a carcinogen, one a mutagen, one an endocrine disruptor, and TMAC. TMAC is a product that cannot be used on any crop whatsoever, be it organic or conventional. In a 2008 lawsuit filed in federal court in San Francisco against the EPA, the results were that checkmate, the safe pesticide, was pulled from the market for use against LBAM. The EPA reversed the emergency exemption. The final programmatic environmental impact report found no damage from LBAM. It would appear the CDFA is now trying to distance itself from its own EIR. The reason more farmers are not speaking out today is fear of reprisals from the CDFA. If they challenge the quarantines, next the state will begin inspecting their restrooms looking for ADA compliance. Farmers are suffering from the economic downturn. Some may lose their farms, and the CDFA is piling on. The CDFA will continue to use aircraft to disperse irradiated moths. They have not said they're not going to use aircraft to spray other pesticides. Only pheromones won't be used airily, will be dispersed airily. I ask you to end the LBAM program as we know it today, lift the unlawful quarantines, and start over with a science-based programmatic environmental impact report. Again, Council has not said no aerial applications of other biopesticides or sterile insects, only pheromones. The print media continues to say LBAM will destroy up to 2,000 plants, and CDFA needs to put this to rest once and for all. Thank you very much, Senator.
I assume that they would still be here. So maybe sergeants, we might want to round the CDFA up. Okay, thank you. So you might want to find them and call the department and make sure they're here.
Good afternoon.
I know they're not at Mr. McAfee's booth, so let's make sure that they come back here. Yes. Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Carolyn Cohen. I'm a clinical psychologist and a member of MAMA's, Mothers of Marin Against the Spray. Mm-hmm. MAMA's came together in 2008 to oppose the light brown apple moth aerial spray program. We represent more than 500 mothers and families in Marin County. Our mission is to reduce the level of environmental toxins and pesticides that children are exposed to provide a healthy, non-toxic environment for children. I wanted to address the topic of pesticide use and health impacts on children who are particularly vulnerable to pesticides. The literature is very clear that pesticide exposures are contributing to exponential increases in illnesses such as asthma and autism. Other health concerns associated with pesticide exposure include childhood cancers, infertility, ADD, Parkinson's, MS, multiple sclerosis, thyroid problems, and early puberty. The effects of pesticides can be multi-generational, whereas not just those who are exposed to the pesticides will be impacted, but their children or grandchildren. When we look at the pesticides planned by this program, we see that they're designed to create a chronic exposure to the chemicals that they emit over long periods of time. For example, when pesticide-laced twist ties are placed in trees in a yard where children are playing, they will be exposed on a regular basis to a cloud of chemicals. I think that what people need to understand is, regardless of the mode of application of these pesticides, whether it's aerially or by trucks or backpack sprayers or twist ties, that the chemical exposure is still the same to children, and that people need to understand this. And the health impacts associated with this exposure will still be the same. Lastly, the pesticides planned by the light brown apple moth program are not adequately tested for human health impacts. The CDFA has kept the pesticide formulation secret because they're trade secrets. So I think the people are entitled to know what they're being sprayed with. In the EIR, I don't know if they've changed this since yesterday, but the EIR entitled them to come by force into people's property and, to cross over their fences and to spray their property without consent. So I think that this program is wrong, and Mamas does not support this program. We would like to see it ended. Thank you.
Let me ask you a question before you leave. So you're, even the twist ties, you're very concerned about the transparency of information and the safety of that particular product, even though it's not aerial sprayed.
Absolutely.
Okay, I didn't know that. We'll try to get you that. I know, understand trade secrets, but let's try to get further down the road on that if we could.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, yes, absolutely, of course.
Thank you. And that is true that they have not disclosed the inert ingredients in the twist ties yet. Mm-hmm. So that is very disturbing. And the fact that they have been talking about stopping the aerial spray program is a good step, but they have not mentioned once stopping the ground spray program. And when they can get warrants and force their way onto people's properties and spray, which they did in Ojai, it's still a very concerning issue for us. I'm Debbie Friedman, chairperson for Mamas. And it's time to change the way we manage pests in California. The way it is now and the way it's been for decades, as Dr. Carey discussed with the medfly, is making our children sick. My son, Ben, is 10 years old. He's here today with me. Child toxicologists have called children like Ben the canaries in the coal mine. He has serious asthma, eczema, allergies, and a weakened immune system. When doctors, including top specialists, worked with us when he was an infant, most of those doctors told us he was the most sensitive, serious case they'd ever seen of these types of issues. He's had 10 long years of chronic health problems, and his health is seriously impacted by pesticides. When we drive through agricultural areas or stay near golf courses, he breaks out in hives and within a few hours needs his inhaler for his asthma. Those same doctors today have told me that they are now seeing more and more children like Ben, and they're very concerned about what they're seeing. This is a recent phenomenon. Chronic health problems like Ben's are becoming epidemic in our society. We know that babies today are born with more than 200 industrial chemicals in their body, and every day our lives are impacted by these chemicals. And in our home, it impacts our family. I'm unable to return to work full-time. I was a corporate attorney before I had children. And even with insurance, our medical bills are so high it's equivalent to a second mortgage. So it's time to change the way we do business in this state when it comes to managing pests and using pesticides. Every time we use and spray pesticides, whether it's the ground sprays, whether it's the aerial sprays, and I did notice that they really just said they're stopping the aerial sprays just for the light brown apple moth. They made that very clear that they could do it for the next pest, and I don't think we should let that go by easily. Every time we expose our children to a cloud of pesticides, from the twist ties or sticky goos and bushes full of pesticides, we're exposing our children to chemicals and toxic chemicals in many cases. It's in the air, it ends up in our water, it's in the grass where children play, it's in our food. We're very disturbed that the CDFA has been forcing farmers to spray pesticides on farms, forcing growers to spray, forcing nurseries to spray for this light brown apple moth, which we've heard today is really not the problem that they're making it out to be. Children take in more toxins than adults because their metabolisms and frequent outdoor play, and they have a harder time expelling toxins because they lack certain enzymes. And I think it's really significant that the majority of health testing for pesticides is done by the pesticide companies themselves. So we are asking, Mamas is asking, the USDA and the CDFA to support our farmers and to help them develop a system that's robust to pests and to minimize pesticide applications, whether it's ground sprays, sticky goos, twist ties, aerial sprays, or any of these applications, because it's not working. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Good point on the spraying, not just this one as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. I'm Edward Siegel. I'm Chief Executive Officer of the Marin County Association of Realtors, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm here on behalf of our 1,500 members to express support for the end of all the efforts to, whether it's control, eradicate, suppress, whatever the word is, stop the program concerning the light brown apple moth. It's important to point out that although I'm speaking here today for the association, in the interest of full disclosure, you should know that I own and live on a 7-acre organic apple orchard in Sonoma County. First, a little brief history. We first got involved in this issue back in 2008. At that time, up until about an hour ago apparently, the state was planning to conduct an aerial campaign to eradicate the moth. As part of the program, airplanes were going to repeatedly spray 9 Northern California cities with pesticide-filled plastic flakes every 30 to 90 days for several years. Our association got so concerned that this aerial spraying would adversely impact the quality of life in Marin that we asked the state to limit the campaign to a ground-based approach. Our realtor members were so concerned that they insisted that we include a warning about the potential for aerial and or ground spraying throughout Marin in our own countywide disclosures form that we asked potential buyers to read and sign. We did as our members asked, and we also added the following language to the form. Quote, "The buyer is advised to consult with environmental health specialists and physicians for further information regarding pesticide spraying." Aerial spraying, which today the state announced is no longer an option, is good news and is definitely a step in the right direction. But we share your concerns, Mr. Chairman, that after we're gone, is the state going to go back and implement it? So steps should be taken to ensure that the option will never be an option again, whether it's a light brown apple moth or any other pesticide. If the aerial spraying had continued, or for some reason it kicks back into place into the future, such spraying could have a devastating, harmful effect on an already sluggish real estate market. According to an economic impact report prepared by the California Alliance to Stop the Spray, there could be as much as a 10% drop in home values in the 9 Northern California cities where the spraying was going to take place. So much for the history. Today we are joining with a broad coalition of farmers, businesses, and community groups and organizations to call for the termination of the entire light brown apple moth program. Why? Well, based on what we've heard today and what we've read before, there are simply too many unanswered questions and unresolved issues associated with the program. We would much rather be safe than sorry and hope this committee will feel the same way. Indeed, based on what we've heard from the experts, the program appears to be a solution for a problem that no longer exists. And I must ask the obvious question. If the light-brown apple moth, as of about an hour ago, is no longer worthy of eradicating, is it even worth trying to control and suppress? In these challenging, disturbing economic times, the state of California should use its very limited money and precious resources to help address real problems that are much more pressing. We hope the state will do the right thing and end the program now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Hey, good morning. Good afternoon. Roy Upton, I represent Citizens for Health. We have 97,000 members nationwide. As you know from a previous testimony that I provided to this committee, I was a co-collaborator on the development of the reclassification petition. I want to give a little bit of the highlights of that process. USDA took that and reviewed our reclassification petition and denied the reclassification of LBAM at that time. They then sent their response to the National Academy of Science for their independent review, and many people within both the state and the federal legislatures were waiting for this review because they thought that NAS would bring independent science to bear on the issues. But many people have not been made aware of what the findings of the NAS review were, and I'd like to put that on the record. First off, the NAS consensus was that USDA did not fully consider and address the specific arguments calling for the reclassification of LBAM, and neither did they conduct a thorough and balanced analysis supporting the conclusions that were made in the two LBAM reclassification petitions that were submitted. But they nevertheless denied the classification or reclassification, even though NAS said that they didn't support that position. Two is USDA requires more robust science to support its position in denying the reclassification petitions and continuing the LBAM eradication program. They also noted that USDA's biological predictions, which actually formed the very justification for the LBAM eradication program from the beginning, it was described by NAS as problematic and in some cases not based on sound, rigorous science. The Plant Protection Act, which is the law that gives USDA the authority to implement these programs, requires that all decisions be based on sound science. NAS clearly said that this was not the case. NAS also reviewed unpublished genetic data that USDA APHIS had and noted that due to the genetic diversity of LBAM that's being found in California, that there couldn't be these populations just popping up from single introductions as alleged by USDA and CDFA. Or that it is, and that is highly unlikely that LBAM was a new introduction to California. This is the NAS, not us. They also noted that USDA's assertions that trapping data suggest that populations are progressively increasing, they described as misleading, because as increasing numbers can also mean that trapping is only becoming more efficient and more prevalent. They noted that LBAM has adapted to, that USDA has alleged that LBAM has adapted to new host plants. And that's where they say there'll be a potential damage to 2,300 different plants. In NAS's review, this should be omitted from their reports because those arguments are not well-founded. The scientific literature reports on no more than 250 plants that may be impacted by LBAM, and most of those, 99% of those plants, are actually common weeds and no economic or little economic significance. The NAS committee also expressed substantial concerns regarding the economic component of USDA's justification for the LBAM program, based primarily on what they said was the ambiguous foundation of the analysis for the predicted geographic distribution of LBAM and the inconsistent and sometimes incomprehensible analytical techniques used, and further noted that they provided no source to substantiate the projections for damage, the estimates used for damage. NAS also noted that USDA did not consider other potentially realistic scenarios by which LBAM could be cost-effectively managed and considered USDA's projections to crop damage to be quote-unquote unlikely. Lastly, they noted that USDA implied that the previous literature provided evidence that the potential for environmental damage to trees and native flora was substantial. NAS agreed with our reclassification petition in noting that the scientific literature does not support that LBAM is a significant threat to trees and native flora, and this is continued to be alleged by USDA. I believe that this is the type of information that needs to get across to the state and federal legislature, because this was a review by NAS that was commissioned by USDA, not by us, and really is probably the reason why the EIR reads as it is today. Senator Flores, you asked a couple of questions about trading to Canada and Mexico. The answer was that in order for LBAM or for crops to go into Canada and Mexico, that they needed to be treated. When they're treated, that means they're treated for all pests, not just LBAM. So whether LBAM's there or not doesn't matter. They need to be treated. New Zealand is able to trade worldwide and meeting very strict LBAM-free restrictions in countries all over the world. The U.S. can do the same. And Canada and Mexico originally only had LBAM restrictions to harmonize with the U.S. to maintain access to U.S. markets, not independent of LBAM itself or because of a biological threat of LBAM. And you also asked about eradication, whether or not it was 100%. The manner in which eradication is defined by CDFA and USDA is more political than biological. In the scientific literature, eradication is 100% of destruction of the population so that they can't repopulate in a specific area. That is not how CDFA and USDA defined eradication, but that is how eradication is basically defined in the entomology literature. This has to become a agricultural issue, not a community issue, and I think that's the message that I want to leave, and I think that's the message that Mummers has just brought as well, is that this is a crop quality issue. This is managed as a crop quality issue worldwide, where LBAM is endemic and has been naturalized for more than 100 years, and this is how we have to do it today and not allow these programs to come into our backyards and our communities. So, thank you.
I'm Daniel Harder. This is appreciate the opportunity to provide public comment. I was a panelist to the previous engagement here, and my experiences have been from the beginning of this issue, and I've maintained from that beginning that eradication is not possible and eradication is not necessary. I'm glad to see that CDFA has recognized that eradication is not possible. I would like to just provide a variety of comments here. Professor Gutierrez's comments about CDFA not respecting the science. I am a PhD scientist in botany. I know the science. I investigated all the references prior to it and prior to developing the petition. I'm a co-author on the petition to reclassify the light brown apple moth with Roy Upton and others. And worse, CDFA rewrites the science to fulfill the conclusions that are necessary for their own documentation. And I point to, in fact, an internal memo that was circulated by Robert Dahl of CDFA showing that there would be increased pesticide use by people if nothing was done to affect the populations of LBAM. Well, it's great to write your own papers, but when they're peer-reviewed and torn down because they're not based on real science or precedent for it, that's fine. And I spent a considerable amount of time last time giving comment about that. Since eradication is recognized as not being obtainable or a realistic goal, there really is no reason to implement control methodologies outside of agriculture. And I strongly agree with Roy Upton's previous comment that this needs to be an agricultural issue exclusively. There is no reason to involve any public citizen, any public lands, any other area outside of ag production to control light brown apple moth and its movement, even in control and suppression. There's also a fear factor among, we pointed earlier about why farmers weren't here. I also would like to say why there aren't many scientists here. You know, entomologists get a lot of money from CDFA to do work in pests that are of economic importance. Not a lot of LBAM work has been done because we realized early on internationally, not a lot of work has been done in LBAM recently, because once they figured out what was going on with LBAM, when you spray with broad-spectrum pesticides, you kill the things that eat it, and now you have a problem with LBAM. That's been shown in the literature over and all. And there is a fear factor of scientists and entomologists losing their funding from CDFA if they make a stand on this. And being naive at the beginning, I'm quite experienced now to understand why. With the new goal of control, non-eradication, and the basis for the development of the EIR and the process was all based on eradication. Everything is on eradication as a goal. Now that there's a completely different set of circumstances for developing EIR, isn't a new EIR necessary to be developed with these new conditions? Because, for instance, in that EIR, the original draft EIR, they talked about integrated pest management as a tool. Well, they said, we're not going to consider that here in this EIR because integrated pest management has a goal of not eradicating but controlling. So we're not even going to consider it. Well, is IPM now reconsidered in this final between the draft and the final? Has it been all reconsidered and reemphasized? Because IPM and Kevin Nixon, the state entomologist, told me when I submitted my report from New Zealand, I spent weeks in New Zealand and reported on what I found from scientists there about light brown apple moths, how they handle it. He said, this report that you produced would be great if we were going to control this thing. But we want eradication, so what this report is worth nothing to us. So it'd be great for them to revisit IPM seriously. And I really believe a new EIR, this EIR needs to be thrown out and a new one produced. Despite what CDFA has said and stands by, it is likely, when closely evaluated, that no pest has been completely eradicated. And this is something that Jim Carey has re-emphasized over and over again. I also want to remind and put this on the record that before the introduction of the aerial spraying, there was not a single efficacy trial or treatment for efficacy against the light brown apple moth and its control before it was sprayed on people. And the same is true for the twist ties. The twist ties will not work in urban areas, mixed forests, mixed areas. They are made and designed for agricultural systems exclusively. There is no testing on humans of the pheromone at the levels they're talking about in these communities, in schools, next to schools. They oversprayed 3 miles. They had trouble with the emitters when they were spraying in air. Some areas got double, triple treatments. What about those areas? Those places are enhanced pheromone concentrations. How are they going to make sure over 18 counties, or let's say just 2 counties, how are they going to make sure that that pheromone is the exact concentration they need to be most efficacious for light brown apple moth when you've got hills, canyons, offshore breezes, onshore breezes, all that stuff happening? How can it be? I mean, there is no way. And I did want to correct one statement by Dr. Dowell that there are very few predators in California that eat the light brown apple moth. A UC researcher, Nicholas Mills, studied the light brown apple moth. His expertise is natural predators to insects. He showed that not less than 13 predators exist in California that eat light brown apple moth.
Direct parasitoids.
Okay, parasitoids and predators, okay. The same thing for controlling. They're used in the same way for controlling the insects. So they're not only a few; there are many. And Nick Mills made the point of emphasizing that there is an enhancement of parasitoids and predators that affect light brown apple moth beyond what's actually controlling the native moths that are in California. Thank you very much.
My name is Paulina Borslick. Since the time I was able to travel independently in my teens, I've always sought out farmers markets wherever I've gone. I'll never forget the taste of an apple I bought at a farmers market in rural Brittany in the early 1970s. I also patronize farmers markets wherever I've lived away from my beloved native California. I so respect the work farmers do and trust they know how to best manage their soils and plants. I'm also friends with Guillermo Payet, the Santa Cruz entrepreneur who started Local Harvest, the premier national website for family farms and local agriculture. At one point 10 years ago, when the website was first being launched, I even wrote many of the product descriptions of the fruits and vegetables that are listed there. I know that CDFA has been very concerned about what impact LBAM might have on the farms, fields, and open spaces of California. But the sellers I've talked with at the farmers markets I've been patronizing in Santa Cruz over the last several years haven't told me of any problems with LBAM, but have told me about the problems caused by LBAM quarantines. 4 years have passed since retired UC Berkeley entomologist Jerry Powell first spotted what he thought might be an LBAM in his Berkeley backyard. By now, almost half a decade later, I think we would all know if LBAM, a bug originally from Tasmania, it's not even native to Australia, were going to defoliate California trees and plants. But by 2010, we here in California really don't have to worry that LBAM will somehow behave much differently than it has in New Zealand, where it's been naturalized for almost 150 years. New Zealand has a climate and terrain very similar to California's and grows many things, such as Chardonnay grapes and Monterey pines, which we think of as being distinctively and importantly Californian. In the places where LBAM likes to live, it's about as common in New Zealand as it is in California. LBAM's meek and mild behavior in California has demonstrated that we can really look to models such as New Zealand's Bald Hills Vineyard, whose award-winning Pinot Noir is created from grapes grown intercropped with flowering buckwheat, phacelia, and mustard. These plants host parasitic wasps which feed on LBAM, so the moth remains no problem at all for this sustainable vineyard. We can also believe what Dr. Michael Butcher, technical manager of Pipfruit New Zealand, has told us. Pipfruit New Zealand is the business association of apple and pear growers in New Zealand, and what Dr. Butcher has said is that LBAM is what he calls background managed to very low natural levels with a particular reliance on wasps. He says LBAM is not a major damaging pest of fruit crops, but is a major quarantine pest for export of fruit to the United States. So I think it's time to trust the wisdom of our farmers and trust what our colleagues in New Zealand have told us. Let's let our farmers get on with their vitally important work and not bother them with the LBAM program. I feel we should end the LBAM program altogether because it doesn't seem to benefit anyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Flores, committee members. My name is David Dilworth. I'm here representing the Board of Trustees of Helping Our Peninsula's Environment, or HOPE. So I get to accurately say, I'm bringing you hope. We are the organization that filed the CEQA lawsuit that was later copied by the City and County of Santa Cruz, which ultimately proved successful and forced the environmental impact report. And I not only appreciated your questions, but the thing that you brought out I thought was so important was that the EIR worked. It did. It changed the goals. Yep. It changed the methods. The EIR system worked. The problem was CDFA didn't want to follow the law. They had to be forced into it. I have some recommendations for you a little bit later on, but the aerial spraying actually appears to have been counterproductive. As they point out, the trapping is what they're basing everything on, and the numbers went up after they sprayed. It doesn't seem like that actually had the effect that they were intending. And what we've heard here today, it appears that the spraying was more harmful than the moth was. The moth hasn't done any damage. We're still at zero damage to the crops in California and our environment, but the CDFA's response to it, the quarantine and so forth, has cost tens of thousands of dollars. It's our opinion that LBAM is a solution in search of a problem. There's been no damage, and so there is no need for this project. What has happened since August, September 2007, is that there's been a movement that you have a room full of highly informed people. They now know the science, they now know the law, and this is just a representative sample of thousands of people throughout the Central Coast who are here to support you for doing something that fundamentally changes the way that business has been done in the past. As Professor Carey pointed out, it needs a top-to-bottom overhaul. You have a lot of support from highly informed people. CDFA has been exhibiting, I'm going to call it a bunker mentality. Hide, don't answer questions, provide fish stories, bad science. Actually, bad science, I think, would be too charitable. I would call it pseudoscience. I write about the difference between science and pseudoscience. And pseudoscience is when you make things up that do not have a clear, unambiguous hypothesis. CDFA, trying to nail them down on what they actually have in mind, is, I think you could call it accurately, moving the goalposts. We had the draft EIR, we had the final EIR. Both of those said that they were going to be eradication was the goal. Then in the findings and the certification, they changed the goal. Courts do not often hold up problems with EIRs. It's a very difficult threshold to reach. But one thing they hold up is a stable project description. And they've just changed the fundamental description of the project that they have. In the Monterey Peninsula, we call this staffocracy. It's goofy decisions and zero accountability. I want to bring one factual thing to your attention. If you notice very carefully, the General Counsel for CDFA did not say that they would not be spraying aerially any toxins. Every time he used that sentence, he said, we will not be aerially spraying pheromones. That's a pretty serious thing to us. Some of the suggestions, we actually believe they may try to do things other than pheromones in the spraying. Here are some suggestions for that would make the process better in the future. First, there is only one place in California law where bureaucrats, staff, are required to answer questions. Only one law. Very few people know that, but that's in the process when you respond to an EIR. Nowhere else are bureaucrats required. They're not required to answer your questions. They're not even required to show up at your meetings. A law that requires them to answer questions would be a big step forward. For sure. Second, there should be a penalty for fish stories. When they make things up, and it takes us 2-3 days, sometimes 2 to 3 months, to get the correct answer, and the burden is now on the public to find out what the correct answers are, and we find out we've been told something completely incorrect, they keep on going. We actually have an award that we're going to be presenting to, this is the 2010 Whopper Award, to OEHA Director Joan Denton, and that is for not correcting the record on this no-link report. And you heard Mr. Levitt just confirm that. He again said there was no link, but that's not what the report said, and that's not what OEHA now maintains. But the public relations said that there was no link to any health effects. Levitt still thinks so, and that's what the EIR went through. Third thing is, we would like to suggest that you require the best available science. The inhalation tests on lungs is still not available. And here is our last suggestion. If someone wants to do business in California, we believe when they file for a corporation at the Secretary of State's office, that they need to give up the right to have a trade secret when it involves inherently hazardous materials, things that can harm people. Trade secrets may be fine with Coca-Cola or anything else, but when you're going to be dealing with pesticides that have the opportunity to hurt people that they're sprayed on or harm people who eat the food that they're used on, there should be no trade secrets. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Flores. My name is Mike DeLay. I'm a State Farm Insurance agent in Pacific Grove. Been doing it for 38 years. My wife and I are one of the 643 registered families that was harmed by the aerial spray. I endured the spraying twice down there in Pacific Grove thinking it was safe. I'm not here to so much speak on that because, well, one thing, my health has changed since that occurred, and we can't explain why or how, but it has, and we still suffer, and we still try to get back to normal health, which we've not been able to do. They talk about uncontrolled spray. I know those planes went over my house 3 times, and they said we'd never see it. Well, following the next day, I had brown splats all over my cars and the house, and it stayed there for a long time. It was difficult to even wash off. But that's not why I'm here. What we did was to try to deal with this issue, this threat that came to us that was going to force us to either close my business and move away when they threatened to come back once a month for 9 months for the next 3 to 5 years, or stop them. We went out to try to stop them. And the idea was, well, we coordinated and created a coalition of California cities to stop the spray, which resulted in a big effort from a lot of people, like David talked about, that were, like myself, forced to learn on an issue that I didn't care about, but yet threatened everything that I had in my health, in my community, and other people in my town. So we went out and sought resolutions to stop it, and magically, miraculously, in 3 months, we had 30 cities writing resolutions in opposition to aerial spray and 3 county boards, which legally represent 2,447,494 Californians represented by their local elected officials in opposition. But those resolutions, if you read them, are not only on aerial spraying. We pushed that issue because that was the major issue that we felt we could get attention on. But if you go back to those cities and look at those county boards and look what they said, aerial spraying was a major issue and an important one, but they were also concerned to the harm being proposed by other chemicals and other techniques that CDFA planned to use to bring pesticides, mind you, pesticides that are only designed for use in agricultural fields, that are poisons and toxins, and bring them into our homes and spray our families, our kids, our schools, our hospitals, just spray them everywhere, and force us to live with this stuff for some undeterminate time. I mean, that itself is insane. And that's the point I say here is, why do we even talk about this? Where is it not even obviously wrong to bring something like that where we live and have to live with it day in and day out? I mean, I just don't understand that. And I know I see you today talking that same way. And I appreciate your questioning to the CDFA. But in working with the people in the cities and talking to people, that's their concern. Where are they taking pesticides and bringing it and having to live with it? I mean, that's just wrong at the get-go. I don't think you have to even argue that, let alone my individual inalienable rights given to me by birth and sworn testimony and oath by you and everybody here in this assembly to protect me of my rights. And I can't declare my rights and say, stop this. This is obviously a violation of that right. But yet, they wouldn't. We asked them. They sprayed. And they're going to continue to come back and what? Put pesticides by, we don't know, trucks, twist ties. We don't know. What's the next species coming? What's that one going to be like? They didn't say they're not going to spray, well, they're going to give up the pheromones, but what about BTK or some other new, wonderful, miraculous pesticide they haven't yet revealed to dump on us, to bring it into our towns? If I could ask anything would be a bill to forbid that kind of activity, bringing untested pesticides or chemicals and forcing people to live with them. How come we don't change it for the chemical corporations to change it that they have to prove no harm? No harm to any product before they use it. That was probably a far reach, but that's what the people want. I think I covered all I wanted to say, and I really thank you for this chance and your efforts. Especially, I really enjoyed what you did with the CDFA. I really liked that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Yes.
My name is Helen Kazoris, coordinator for Stop the Spray, Alameda County. I have come here today to voice my support for our farmers and growers. As a patron of farmers markets for decades, I especially appreciate food grown in ecologically sustainable ways without the use of pesticides. Over the past 2 years, I have heard many accounts of hardships experienced by our farmers under quarantine in CDFA USDA's LBAM eradication program. None of the farmers I have spoken with consider LBAM to be a serious threat to their crops. However, they are threatened by CDFA USDA tactics to enforce LBAM quarantines. Most are afraid to speak publicly for fear of retribution by these same agencies. I have heard that CDFA USDA eradication teams perform special LBAM inspections in agricultural fields. When a larva is suspected to be a light brown apple moth, it is sent to a laboratory for identification. Farmers are then notified by telephone with claims of positive LBAM identification, but are not provided with any documented evidence to substantiate these claims. We know that for much of this time, positive LBAM identification of larvae has been inconclusive according to USDA documents. Farmers are forced to spray their crops with pesticides to eradicate LBAM. In some cases, farmers have no choice but to plow their fields under. When a harvest is destroyed, financial losses are incurred, which drives smaller farmers out of business. Moreover, forced applications of pesticides are particularly problematic for farmers whose commitment to chemical-free agriculture is often more stringent than USDA's own organic standards. Since the inception of the LBAM program, berries sold at the farmers' markets are more noticeably bruised. Berries are damaged by overhandling during frequent inspections for LBAM. During inspections, growers cannot operate their farms, which results in more economic loss. Increased paperwork places an additional burden on farmers, especially for smaller family-operated farms that cannot afford to hire more workers. Almost 3 years have passed since CDFA first declared LBAM an emergency. Yet there is still no documented LBAM crop damage. CDFA dubbed LBAM the light brown everything moth, an insect purported to destroy crops if left unchecked, resulting in multi-billion-dollar losses to the agriculture industry. In reality, unnecessary CDFA USDA quarantines have hurt our farmers and growers, all for an insect that has proven to be of minor concern in the field. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Senator Flores, thanks for having me today. My name is Glenn Chase. I'm a professor of management systems. And before I get into my specific testimony, I'd like to turn toward the audience and recognize who exactly has come here from the public as a comparison to who's come here from the CDFA, not just today, but for some time. I've been in meetings and hearings since 2007, and I have yet to hear a single scientist that is supporting the position of CDFA. I've only heard management people that continue to say we rely on experts, yet they've never named those experts to my knowledge, and I've never heard from a single one. But I'd like to turn and just look to the audience to acknowledge who's here. I see David Dilworth, who's a head of an agency that brought suit against the CDFA and forced an EIR in this matter. I see Frank Egger, who brought suit against the EPA, and based on that suit, the Checkmate pesticide has since been disallowed across the United States in the manner that it was used on the people of Santa Cruz and Monterey County. I see Dan Harder, the former director of the Arboretum in UCSC, a person that, in my opinion, is... Let me put this cap back on. In my opinion, is the most expert on LBAM's effect on plants, hands-on, because in the state, he has the most experience hands-on with what LBAM actually does to the biggest variety of plants in our state, and specifically those that have come from New Zealand and the Southern Hemisphere. I see, I don't recall Gutierrez's name, but he's a hero of mine. I've been reading and studying and analyzing Gutierrez and Mills' report because they don't just make statements, assertions that it's going to do something. They actually scientifically modeled it, and their model is consistent worldwide with where the moth actually lives. They didn't just assert it and say it'll live here. They modeled it, and then they took the actual data and said, sure enough, we find it in New Zealand exactly where our model would have anticipated. So the strength of their model is incredible. James Carey, I couldn't possibly introduce him. He's an invasive pest specialist worldwide, and he's here. We've got Roy Upton from a health organization who also was a co-author of the reclassification petition. So those are the scientists. Excuse me if I've missed anyone. And then we've got incredibly well-informed people. And I want to show you that this is what's come forward from the public, and I really appreciate this and I respect this, and I want to have you think about putting this up against the scientists that you've heard from, and if they existed, they certainly would have lined them up, as they certainly have with the attorneys. Anyway, back to me. I'm a professor of management systems. My specialty is environmental economics, and I also teach graduate level in statistics. So I have expertise in differentiating and recognizing situations that are probabilistic versus ones that are causation. Anyway, it's my opinion, given that I have so much experience in management systems, that I see this program as something the CDFA wants to do totally unrelated to the light brown apple moth. So no matter what the changes are in circumstances, no matter how the objective changes, no matter what changes, the program goes forward regardless. And that's been the condition since we heard about this moth in 2007. So I had a prepared talk, but rather than that, I want to say that since 2007, when I first heard about this moth, there has been misinformation delivered by the secretary of the CDFA on TV news, by the public relations director, Steve Lyle, in the papers, and more recently by John Connell, they've since retired. But as an example, a practical example, it may not be as clean and as swift, but I want to talk about specific misinformation that's been delivered to you today in this room. Okay, crop damage. I've got the official environmental impact report document here, and let's remember that the CDFA has reported crop damage since 2007 in community meetings, through the press, in their own press releases. Okay, and recently, if you've heard about berry damage, I'm going to read to you from the draft EIR, and remember, the draft is not an edition that got changed. The draft and the final EIR are what composes the PEIR, which is the Program Environmental Impact Report. Those two documents are it. The draft has most of the substance. The final has the comments to the public and the few changes that they may have made. On Chapter 3, page 320, it says, quote, "No direct crop damages have been experienced to date in areas subject to existing infestation." That contradicts, this is a July 31st, 2009 document. This document contradicts every claim of damage CDFA. Since this document, CDFA has again claimed damage, and it goes through the press and it's repeated by good people, innocent. And as of yesterday, I contacted the infested areas, San Francisco, no documentation of damage at the Ag Commissioner's office in San Francisco. Approximately 8 days ago, no documentation of damage in the Santa Cruz office. And these are the places where the damage has been consistently claimed. Today you heard, since development of SIT, they can now do things. I want to bring to your attention that is misinformation. There has never been a single interference of mating of LBAM through SIT. SIT is still in the R&D stage. SIT is far from a stage that it can perform in this program. And if you were to talk to any of the distinguished scientists in the room, they would tell you approximately that LBAM is about the last candidate for SIT because of the nature of its biology. And very approximately, the condition of irradiating these moths is making them almost dysfunctional, let alone the thought that they could challenge wild moths in mating. Expansion of LBAM was spoken today by the CDFA. That is an absolute assertion. There is absolutely no proof, no documentation, no basis that LBAM has expanded. Have they caught more? Of course they are. And of course that's been because of could be because of the variation in the traps and the location of those traps. So I want to make sure that we don't leave this room today thinking LBAM is expanding. That's absolutely unproven. Something about conviction of the CDFA. Eradication has been mandatory. It's essential we eradicate up till a few days ago. And for the timing, the draft EIR said eradication's mandatory. The final EIR said eradication is our goal. And a few days ago, when the APHIS, which is the agency of the USDA that is driving this program, came out finally and said eradication is no longer feasible, which James Carey has said, and these other scientists 3 years ago. So we heard today and here that, okay, so we're going to control and suppress, et cetera, et cetera. But I remember just days ago the technical working group said eradicating is essential. We've gotten messages from people in the technical working group. They've never said that. They said something to the effect that under the conditions that if the moth was just at the shore right near the port and we could go and stop it right now. But conditions were never that when we found them. But notice that CDFA gave up eradication without even a flinch. So think about their conviction for any of the things that they've told you in this chambers that's so important to move on immediately. We heard in this room today, how did this thing spread? Natural, they said, was slow. Well, I would ask James Carey to add or correct me on this. That's exactly the way these moths move. Some of these moths are generally known to only move 100 feet in a lifetime. So they've delivered that science that we know. It moves slowly. But then what have they said? Modern transportation is responsible for this whole expansion of taking over of California by LBAM. That's not even a good science fiction movie. I mean, you think about it yourself. And first off, I don't know, I couldn't say yes or no. It's an assertion that has no basis in science. They have no actual documentation of these moths being moved in trucks or trains or airplanes. Statutory versus substance. Every time we corner them on the science, they immediately move to the statutory regulations that they're doing this because USDA is asking. So they flip-flop back and forth. Oh, now it's USDA. Is it the science? Well, so you notice it goes back and forth. There was a comment today by John, the lawyer for CDFA. I don't recall his last name. He said the public is invited back into the EIR process. I submitted 96 pages of questions to the EIR, to the draft EIR, and I can't recognize a single answer to one of my questions in the response to the EIR that CDFA included in the final EIR. Most all of my questions were grouped into a group question, and I tried. I gave it my best effort. I couldn't pull the answer to my questions out of the group questions in the way they fabricated the answers. John also said an aerial spray of pheromone. I want to clarify that for this hearing room. The dictionary defines pheromone as a substance emitted by an insect. There is not a single drop, nor has there ever been a single drop in any of the pesticides that CDFA used to spray or that they intend to use on twist ties or any other application. It is a synthesized chemical that has a similar attribute to attract moths. They choose to call it pheromone, and it's attached with a huge number of other chemicals that we don't know. And they call it, well, then they'll say, well, it's a synthesized pheromone. It is not. A pheromone is a chemical emitted by an insect. Theirs is not a single drop. And by the way, in that aerial spray, if you think, what's a big deal, synthetic or not, the synthetic chemical they use and called pheromone is not sufficient to fool the moth. The amount that was, the concentration that was in the air in Santa Cruz was approximately 1 million times greater than people would ever come in contact that were in proximity to light brown apple moth. And thanks to Dennis Knepp, another citizen who is a PhD scientist in the Monterey area, to go into CDFA records, finally pull that out and deliver that to a very small number of people because it's hard to understand in the general media. Okay, there was a statement today here that 500 million crops are at risk annually. Jerry Powell, a retired UC Berkeley entomologist, first discovered the moth in his backyard in 2006, not in 2007 that CDFA continues to say. CDFA confirmed it in 2007. Now, think about this, about the probability and the statistics. Jerry is probably the only one in the state, being a micromoth specialist, who lived in the southern hemisphere. I don't think back in 2006, another entomologist would have recognized the difference between an elbam and an orange tortrix, which most people still can't identify. But because he lived in the southern hemisphere, he suspected it. Did he find one? No. On 2 separate occasions, Jerry found one each in his backyard. So think about the probability. Did elbam arrive in 2006? The chances of that are the same, approximately, as an individual winning the Maine California lottery 2 times during the same year. So in other words, even within a few years of that, it would still be that approximate probability. So the reality is, statistically, if elbam got here just 10 years ago, it would be an incredible coincidence, one in tens of thousands. More realistically, it looks like 30, 40, 50 years statistically, and that coincides exactly with the statement that James Carey, with his expert opinion, says it looks like that approximately. And he's encouraged the CDFA to do some significant analysis, but of course they never did. They just criticized Jim for, where's your paper, when he was trying to encourage them to get on the right foot on this. Today it was mentioned the EIR was started before the court case. You saw what conviction they had with that. They fought the judge not to do the EIR, so let's put that on the record. And by the way, it's the certification document that claims that they will do no aerial spray. The final EIR and the draft EIR, which is the full the program Environmental Impact Report, PEIR, still contains aerial spray. So it's only in the last few days that they've actually dropped this, since APHIS said it's not feasible to eradicate. Okay, I'm almost there. Today it was referenced that OEHA, and is it possible to read what was said in the record for something that CDFA said, or is that too troublesome now? Could that be read here?
Just so you know, I mean, the purpose of the hearing and public comment, or the purpose of the hearing in general, is to build a transcript. So go ahead.
Well,
and I say that with affection. So go ahead.
Okay. I forget the fellow's name from CDFA. What's the fellow that was up here?
Mr. Levitt?
Yeah, Levitt. Okay. Levitt said something to the effect that OEHA found either that there was no connection between the spray and illnesses reported, or that the spray had not caused the illness. Can we read that back to see what he actually said? Can we read that in the record? Okay, no problem.
We don't have it here.
Okay. Yeah. I'll go forward either way.
Why don't you give us your interpretation of it, okay?
Yeah, I will. Whether he said it wasn't the cause, or OEHA said it wasn't the cause, or that there was no connection. I'd like to read what OEHA actually said.
Okay.
I've got the document here. Okay. quote, "Our review of the symptoms reports received following the aerial applications was unable to conclusively determine whether or not there was a link between the spraying and the symptoms reported." Okay, there's also been previous statements of non-toxic of these substances. I'd like to read this to you. This is from OEHA again, and also a joint report from DPR as well, Department of Pesticide Regulation. On page 2 of their October 31, 2007 report, I believe it was released to the public on November 18th approximately. The lepidopteran pheromone that they call pheromone, a Category 3 toxin. And for the record, Category 1 is the most toxic toxin. That would be hazmat suit, fall over and die without it. Category 4 is the lowest category of toxicities. It's a level 3 toxin. They sprayed that on the people and children of Santa Cruz and Monterey counties. And for clarification, when a woman or a parent, usually I think of the mother, so I say a woman, when they go talk about protecting their child and non-toxic substance, that is not a level 4 toxin. Non-toxic substances are outside the range of toxic substances 1 to 4. Well outside. Okay, I've mentioned CDFA has always relied on experts that have never come forward or ever even been identified. We've requested them over 3 years now. And what I'll ask finally, and I asked from this committee, earlier, Senator, you said that this committee has the jurisdiction over this agency and over this program. I sincerely ask that you literally stop this program. You use any routine measures or extraordinary measures that you have to stop this program. We used to call it eradication program. Now we call it differently. I understand future policies is a great thing to focus on, and hopefully in the future we will. But to protect the people of California and to set a precedent against this inappropriate behavior, if nothing else, and to protect the people, stop this program. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi, Stacy Carlson, Marin County Agricultural Commissioner.
Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. Without regressing, but moving forward, I would suggest that in looking down into the future, that emphasis be placed on looking at risk assessment for pests or pests on the horizon that we'll likely face. And I think this would have to be a collaborative effort with the National Academy of Science, USDA, CDFA, University of California, California State University system in general could contribute a lot to developing risk assessments just in a broad brush way. I've been doing this work for over 30 years, and biological control of our pests that have been introduced has been a popular end product of control programs, and as a result has been largely accepted. One of the hurdles we have, though, is that introduction of biological control agents are largely restricted due to the science of potential impact to agricultural crops. Now, that's an important assessment to make, so it's not just this arbitrary bring in biocontrol agents. But we have an opportunity here to take a look at what agencies are doing this kind of work. And the premier agency is USDA and various universities. And they need to have support, funding support, to be able to identify what those insects are, or the activities, and do the foreign exploration so they can bring them in, work them through quarantine systems so they're eligible for use, or understand them better. Certainly a Center for Biological Control, which has been discussed for many years, and has been discussed to be housed or placed at the University of California, Davis. If you look at the history of IPM programs, virtually never got off the ground. There were several legislative acts that supported sustainability, agricultural, pesticide reduction acts, I could go on, and never received appropriate funding to lift those off the ground. And then when we have these problems, everybody relies on that's the model we want to follow, but in fact, those models don't exist because we don't have the appropriate infrastructure to carry those activities out. So I would suggest strongly that those issues be readdressed and not left off the table in this discussion. Everybody wants results, but nobody wants to step up and identify how you accomplish those. So I recommend that you take a look at that Center for Biological Control, the coordination and cooperation efforts that could be enhanced by international discussion on this topic, and then with the idea of making those resources available to take care of these problems that we have. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for your patience, and I really appreciate this opportunity to be here and to speak. My name is Tammy Davis, and I work with an organic farm and nonprofit that researches biodiversity called the Regenerative Design Institute. And I just wanted to speak for exactly what he was saying was the research and development that's happening. How can we get off of the track of the war against insects and learn how to operate in harmony with nature and support the diversity that nature supports? And so we're learning to farm with a polyculture and many different crops that attract beneficial insects. And I believe that supporting a natural balance in our farming techniques will really eradicate programs like LBAM eradication. And so I would like to just say that we're really working hard. We don't want to be overhead sprayed against our will when we're here experimenting on how can we grow these important foods for the population without being interrupted with chemical sprays or some of the methods that are being enforced on farmers. And also, the farmers are so struggling already to make it financially, and I really want to support organic farming. And so I think that we just need to look at all the different ways that we're experimenting, and we can fund further these kind of experiments, and also just really look at what it is. We're protecting our food source, our food supply. And what is the big picture? We're protecting our food supply by forcing farmers to spray poison on our land, and I think that's a big mistake. So I really appreciate your support and the testimony here today. Thank you.
I'm Barbara Deutsch, and I'm very grateful I attended this hearing and heard all of these comments. It alarms me to think of biological control, especially a center for it, considering when I hear that people are afraid that a moth, that there's no evidence ever harmed anything, might harm redwoods, and I think about how the redwoods have disappeared, and then I hear how the goal of this program is to make it possible to keep shipping products worldwide, but the reason that the moth is a danger is because of modern transportation. There are a lot of contradictions that it seems to me it would be good for us to look more closely at, including the language we use about insects. And I would like to recommend to those who are working to resolve these contradictions that they read Edmund Russell's War and Nature, which carries on the work of Rachel Carson and shows how, since we have been able to get engines into the air, we have more and more viewed insects as enemies and enemies as insects. And one predator of insects, especially of caterpillars, that has not been mentioned today is songbirds. I garden for butterflies, and anyone who gardens for butterflies will tell you that the problem is you don't have caterpillars. because if you garden for butterflies, your garden is full of songbirds, and they have to have the caterpillars to form the eggshells, and they have to have the caterpillars, many of them, to feed the young. And it may be with the environmental destruction that our species is so good at, we're going to be grateful for caterpillars of almost any species if we do what Peter Steinhardt has recommended we do. He said, if we are intelligent tinkerers, the first thing we will do is to keep among us whatever species of songbirds are still present. I brought some photographs of songbirds in our apple tree, and I thought I would just let you look at them. And I wanted to make a recommendation on no scientific basis, but on the basis of having spent a little time on a farm where horses were were an essential part of the workforce when I was a girl. And I think farmers, if they are brought into the decision-making, which it seems to me is the only way to do it right, would be open to the suggestion that caterpillars be encouraged and there be hedgerows and they work with the project that Wes Jackson and Wendell Berry are advocating of the 50-year Farm Bill. And we develop as food sources perennial plants that are natural in California, because when you have all your crops from Europe and other places, of course the associates of those plants are going to be here, and instead of managing and eradicating, James O. Lucan is the one who said invasive is not a scientific term, pest is not a scientific term. These are words that are have psychological coloration. And if you change back from the ethic of eradication that he says we went to without a discussion to the ethic of conservation, then it seems to me you'll be creating a center for biological diversity, which would protect us, a very new species compared to moths and butterflies, which are over 100 million years in existence. It would protect us much better than the programs that are underway at the moment.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hello, Senator Flores. Thank you very much for holding this hearing. My name is Unique Phillips. I've written my comment, I think probably rewritten it about 5 times, but great testimony today from everybody and the panelists. Again, my name is Unique Phillips. I'm a third-generation Californian, and my grandparents farmed citrus in San Diego. So I greatly appreciate Aaron coming up today from San Diego area and testifying. In the fall of 2009, I began to work with California farmers and growers and business people after hearing concerns from those farmers on the LBAM program, not the moth. So together, in an effort to get sign-ons to a letter which asked that the LBAM program quarantines be ended, the funding for the program be cut, and the moth itself be reclassified, I wanted to read part. I'm not going to read the whole thing because I know it's been a long meeting, but I wanted to read parts of it. This is basically an excerpt of the farmer press release. Farmers, growers, together, farmers, growers, nursery owners, plant wholesalers, produce distributors, restaurant owners, and business proprietors from around California have signed a letter asking that the light brown apple moth eradication program be ended along with its quarantines, and that the classification of the moth be changed from a Class A serious pest to Class C of minor concern. Farm Bureau member and conventional apple grower Dave Hale from Sonoma County says the current program accomplishes nothing except more paperwork for farmers. Signatories from Sonoma Valley to the Yolo County to the Monterey Bay Area to Fresno want the program ended because it wastes taxpayer dollars and its quarantines hurt local producers. The economic damage from LBAM has stemmed solely from these government-mandated sanctions and not from the insect itself. Peggy Da Silva of Veritable Vegetables from San Francisco, the oldest distributor of organic produce in the United States, says that for more than 35 years, our company has supported farmers who approach pest problems in ecologically sound ways. Many smaller independent farmers have been hurt by regulations that do not respect the great skill farmers have in managing their farms, producing healthy crops, and contributing to our state's economy. The LBAM eradication program, with its zero-tolerance policy, has meant that a single potential sighting of LBAM in a field or nursery can shut down an entire operation for weeks. Former California Farm Bureau Federation President Doug Mosbar has said the trading restrictions pose a particular burden for organic farmers and for small-scale farms. That's a quote, sorry. And he's absolutely right on that. Almost 100 conventional and organic farms and nurseries, both large and small, have signed the letter, and an equal number of business supporters of the farmers have also signed on. I'm submitting for the record the two separate blank letters mentioned. Let's see. Originally, all the names of the farmers were going to be released to the CDFA and USDA Secretary Carmore and Vilsack, but after much concern and fear from the farmers that were signing on, the decision to keep their names confidential was chosen. But I did bring the signatures with me as proof, and you're happy to go through it. And it's the witness here, so 100 farmers are here today on paper. I find this really a tragedy that our farmers so clearly are scared of CDFA. I collected a lot of these signatures individually from farmers. Took, excruciatingly, painfully slow, but I got to hear their story one by one. And as a Californian, as somebody who his grandparents farmed, this is really so scandalous. So if I kind of understand this well, our tax dollars go to an agency that is supposed to be supportive of farmers, but it has become clear that farmers are terrified of this agency. And in addition, in the urban area, CDFA with a warrant can cross over our private properties and force this program. This is just really, truly scandalous. This should be an embarrassment to CDFA and to every Californian who knows these facts. Since this press release that was released on March 8th, more farmers and growers and business people have signed on, and a few who could not attend really wanted me to read their short statement. We have Sonoma County Karen Van Kane, agricultural lender, rancher, farmer. She says this LBAM issue is negatively impacting Californians' farmers' ability to obtain financing. She lost the selling of a property because of LBAM. Napa County world-renowned French Laundry restaurant. Our entire restaurant group, which is the French Laundry, Bouchon Bakery, and Ad Hoc, support our farmers in an effort to reclassify LBAM and lift the quarantines. Sonoma County Gier Gettle Seed Bank sells seeds nationwide, with the majority of the business occurring in California. They actually are based in Missouri and have moved one of their businesses in California because it's so heavily supported. We feel that the LBAM quarantines are hurting not only our California farmers, but businesses like us and all taxpayers. A Farm Bureau member quarantined apple grower who would not give his name just simply said, the program doesn't stop the pest and this costs a lot of money. And we recently had Alice Water from Chez Panisse sign on as well. We will not stop collecting names until the program is ended. And I would like to humbly suggest that if CDFA will not call off the LBAM program once and for all, that this committee, if possible, demand congressional members to hold a hearing. And after all the testimony today, it's clear that there does need to be a shift on how insects are dealt with, and a paradigm shift is needed. So I thank you very much.
Thank you for submitting that. Any more public comment this time?
My name is Andrew Gutierrez. Just a very brief follow-up. It's obvious that the public's against it. There is no scientific evidence that it really is a serious pest. It's going to be a limited distribution. And I recall my first case of dealing with CDFA. They were trying to eradicate a thing called grape leaf skeletonizer. This was back in 1976. And the CDFA people were approaching the California Wine Advisory Board to seek their support to continue an eradication campaign. The map that they showed of all the places they had eradicated this particular pest were red dots on a map of California. It looked like the state of California had measles. What they were doing was not eradication. What they were doing was spot pest control. And it appears that the tactics that they finally have adopted for light brown apple moth is more of the same. The science does not support what they're trying to do. And if they're only doing control, that means the organism will probably achieve its maximum geographic space, which will be determined by weather and by natural enemies. I would urge the committee to stop the program.
My name is Mary Beth Brannigan from the Ecological Options Network, and I'm so blessed to be from beautiful West Marin, where it's surrounded by organic farms, dairies, and ranches. And I wanted to, I brought several things here. I have a letter from our Bolinas Community Public Utility District that is addressed to the CDFA, and I won't read the whole thing, but just one point, that the Bolinas community, well, they say, first of all, that the draft programmatic environmental impact report is fatally limited in scope because, among other things, it doesn't adequately analyze the potential adverse effects of the light brown apple moth eradication program on non-target species. We're all very aware of the need for a balance in our ecosystems, and caterpillars are food for the birds and the spiders, and that's why they're really not a problem. The Bolinas community remains adamantly opposed to aerial or ground spray application of any pesticides within this county to control the LBAM, and we repeat our position that there is substantial evidence that eradication of the species is neither feasible nor achievable, and now, of course, APHIS agrees with them. And they also copied this letter to the fellow water districts in Marin County and the Point Reyes National Seashore, who is a significant landholder in West Marin, asking them to join in opposition to the LBAM control program. So they're asking that you could do everything in your power to prevent that program from ever being implemented. I also have a letter from the Board of Supervisors of Marin to the officials at CDFA, and I'll just mention one of the points which hasn't really come up here yet, and that is that the public comment period to respond to the draft PEIR for the LBAM closed on September 28, 2009. And however, comments on the final PEIR released in February 2010 were restricted to only public agencies that commented on the draft PEIR, with no provision for comments by the general public. We believe that comments from all members of the public should not be excluded from consideration in such an important public policy issue as the controlled and eradication of LBAM from California. And they recommended that the public comment period be extended for 30 days and that all comments received be reviewed and responded to before the final PEIR is certified. I don't know if there's anything that's possible now that it is. I have also a resolution from the Bolinas Community Center opposing the California Department of Food and Agriculture's aerial and ground application program to control the light brown apple moth. And I won't read that whole thing, but it's making all of the points that have been made here today. But I do want to read a letter in behalf of folks from the Don't Spray California group who couldn't be here today. Dear Senator Flores and members of the Senate Food and Agriculture Committee, we are unfortunately unable to attend today's hearing, as most of the members of Don't Spray California are disabled by chemical injuries. It is difficult for us to access many public meetings. There are far too many errors in CDFA's final programmatic EIR to address in a brief public comment, including repetitive pictures of alleged damage, in one case the same exact photo 3 times. CDFA has set aside no public comment period to respond to how commenters have been misquoted and misrepresented in CDFA's responses, which is, I think, one of the points that the Board of Supervisors was making as well. It is especially disturbing that CDFA refused to respond to comments made at the hearing of this committee on August 25, 2009, which was specifically called to evaluate the sufficiency and factualness of the LBAM EIR. In the FPEIR, CDFA responded that the transcript, which was submitted by legal counsel for Santa Cruz County, was disregarded because it does not, quote, it does, quote, not constitute comments on the EIR itself, end quote, even though Senator Flores clearly stated that the intention of the hearing was to build an official record to be submitted to the CDFA's process, and that this committee has oversight over CDFA. We are outraged that Secretary Kawamura certified the FPEIR yesterday, and a notice of determination was posted preempting this hearing. Even though the FPEIR document that has been certified continues to refer to the LBAM program as an eradication program, in the CEQA findings that preface Secretary Kawamura's certification letter, CDFA states that the agency is now implementing a, quote, systematic statewide program to control and suppress and in some cases eradicate LBAM. Since LBAM continues to be classified as an actionable pest, which requires quarantines, the implication is that this program will likely become another permanent program, similar to the gypsy moth slow the spread program that has been poisoning states back east for over a decade, following many decades of failed eradication programs. Such a gypsy moth program visited California a year ago when CDFA bullied elders and disabled people in the Ojai Valley, injuring several with forced pesticide applications, actions with the FPEIR describes as potentially necessary in the LBAM program as well. And I have to say, these are my own words, this is what all our communities are really concerned about, Senator Flores. We're not reassured by no aerial spraying because they can come after us with the high-pressure spray hoses from a truck or a backpack. While many have been most concerned about the aerial pesticide applications of the LBAM program, please understand that the so-called pheromone pesticides are specifically designed to be constantly present in the environment, regardless of the application method. Both the industry and USDA describe this process as saturating areas with the chemicals. This constitutes long-term chronic exposure. The acute tests that were done on the synthetic LBAM pheromone resulted in alarming effects on the organs and immune systems of test animals. Another synthetic pheromone, Disparlure for gypsy moths, has been shown to persist in the human body for at least 17 years. More information about this and other aspects of this program can be found on our website at don'tspraycalifornia.org. These are serious concerns which CDFA's risk assessment approach regards as negligible and acceptable risks. Those of us who have been injured by these and other pesticides regard such callous determinations that some segments of the population are expendable as violations of our human rights and as threats to our lives. We ask that you step in and exert your power as a committee with oversight over CDFA and prevent this agency from moving forward with this fraudulent and toxic program. Thank you. And I have to say that all of this discussion makes me so much more compassionate to the farm workers' situation, which is hideous, just hideous, and totally unacceptable in the supposedly civilized society. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay. It's now nearing 5 p.m. I do want to thank everyone for coming. I'd like to say give us the opportunity to digest all of the good recommendations that have been made here. And we probably will have another hearing just to close on this issue, to get some closure. We may possibly have legislation that gets to some of the things that were mentioned here. And I think we want to make sure that when we all leave this place, and that means some of us who are leaving and the governor and others, that we try to have a closure on this as an issue so that we're not redoing some of this. I'm very sensitive to the fact that one pesticide was mentioned today, and I really appreciate people bringing that up as well. So we will take this very good hearing, and we will take all information. You should have a transcript of this next 2 or 3 weeks. And then let's go through this, and we'll write a very detailed letter to CDFA and try to get some follow-up in terms of what they need to do to close this issue for everyone. And I do appreciate everyone traveling here and giving us their testimony. I didn't know we had the hearing in August, and I'm sure for those of you that were here in August and gave testimony, it's almost as though we should have just done what we said in August, because we had to go through this entire process to get the same, if you will, issue to the forefront, which is, eradication is really not the issue here at all. It's always been about finding other ways to deal with something that's been here for a very, very long time. Probably still will be here for a very long time. And we're trying to figure out what's the best means to deal with that, and if we need to deal with it at all. So I think that's an issue that we will take under advisement, and don't be surprised if we see some legislation before the end of the session. So I want to adjourn and thank everyone for coming. Thanks.